The restaurant went silent when three suited men surrounded the elderly woman's table, their voices sharp with threats about overdue payments and final warnings. Most diners looked away. But Evan Hart, mechanic, single father, man with secrets burned into his past, stood up. "Wrong table, wrong day, gentlemen," he said quietly, his scarred hands steady at his sides. They sneered at his worn jacket. They didn't know about the fire. They didn't know what those hands had done. They didn't know who they were challenging. Stay with me until the end of this story and drop a comment with your city below. I want to see how far this tale travels across the world. The Glass Tower Diner sat wedged between two corporate giants on 7th Avenue. The kind of place where construction workers ate breakfast beside executives grabbing late-night coffee, where the fluorescent lights hummed the same tired song, whether you wore a $2,000 suit or oil-stained coveralls. Evan Hart preferred it that way. Invisible. Unremarkable. Just another face in the crowd, another body taking up space in a city that had millions. He'd been coming here every Thursday night for 8 months, ever since the incident, though he didn't call it that anymore, didn't let himself name it at all. Thursday nights meant his son Danny stayed late at robotics club, which meant Evan had 2 hours of solitude, 2 hours where he could sit in a corner booth with black coffee and a turkey club he never quite finished, watching the world move without him. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and industrial cleaner, with undertones of grease that had soaked into the vinyl booths over decades. Evan sat with his back to the wall, old habit, the kind you don't shake even when the reasons fade, his calloused fingers wrapped around a ceramic mug that had a chip on the rim. His hands told stories he never would. The silver scars across his knuckles, the puckered burn tissue along his right forearm that disappeared beneath his rolled sleeve, the way his left thumb didn't quite straighten anymore. He was 37, but looked older in the harsh light, his dark hair threaded with premature gray, his face carrying the kind of weathered quality that came from seeing too much too young. He'd been handsome once, his ex-wife used to say, before the job changed him, before the nightmares started, before she'd packed Danny's toys into boxes and told him she couldn't watch him disappear anymore. The diner was moderately full for a Thursday at 7 p.m. A couple of nurses from St. Catherine's Hospital, still in their scrubs, occupied a table near the window. 4 construction workers argued good-naturedly about the Giants' game at the counter. A businessman typed furiously on his laptop, his Bluetooth earpiece blinking like a confused firefly. And in the booth nearest the kitchen, an elderly woman sat alone with a cup of tea and a slice of apple pie she'd barely touched. Evan noticed her because he noticed everything, another habit that wouldn't die. She was small, perhaps 70, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun that seemed at odds with her nervous energy. Her hands shook slightly as she lifted her teacup, and she kept glancing toward the door as if expecting someone, or dreading someone. Her clothes were neat but dated, a floral dress with a cardigan that had been mended at the elbow, the kind of repair job done by someone who knew how to make things last. She reminded him of his grandmother, who'd raised him after his parents died, who taught him that dignity wasn't about what you owned but how you carried yourself through the world. His grandmother had been gone 5 years now, but her lessons stuck like burrs. The door chimed. 3 men walked in, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. They wore suits, expensive ones, the kind with subtle pinstripes and Italian cuts, but they wore them like armor, not fashion. The first man through the door was tall and broad-shouldered, his shaved head gleaming under the lights, a thin scar running from his left eye to his jawline. The second was shorter but built like a fire hydrant, his neck thick enough to strain against his collar, his knuckles swollen in the way that suggested frequent use. The third was thin and pale, almost delicate-looking, with wire-rimmed glasses and a smile that made Evan's instincts scream. They scanned the room with the practiced efficiency of predators identifying prey, and their eyes landed on the elderly woman. She saw them. Her teacup rattled against the saucer as she set it down, and all the color drained from her face. She tried to look away, tried to pretend she hadn't noticed them, but it was too late. They were already moving toward her booth, their expensive shoes clicking against the linoleum floor like a countdown. Evan's grip tightened on his coffee mug. Not your problem, he told himself. Not your fight. He'd promised himself after the last time, after the fire, after the funerals, after the mandatory psych eval that had ended his career. that he was done. Done playing hero. Done thinking he could fix what was broken in the world. Done paying the price that came with getting involved. The bald man reached the woman's booth first. He didn't sit. He loomed, his shadow falling across her like a threat. "Mrs. Chen," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the diner. The businessmen stopped typing. The nurse's conversation faltered. "You've been avoiding us." I told Mr. Russo I need more time," Mrs. Chen stammered, her accent thick with stress, her hands clutching at her napkin like a lifeline. "My grandson, he's trying to help, but the medical bills—" "That's not our problem," the fire hydrant man cut in, his voice flat and final. He pulled out his phone, showed her the screen. Even from his booth, Evan could see it was a photo of a small grocery store, the kind of family business that anchored old neighborhoods. "Nice shop you got. Be a shame if something happened to it. Electrical fires are so common in buildings that old." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Mrs. Chen's eyes filled with tears. "Please, I just need 2 more weeks." "My daughter, she's sending money from California. You had 2 weeks," the thin man with glasses said softly, almost kindly, which somehow made it worse. "You had 2 months. Mr. Russo's been very patient, but patience has a price, Mrs. Chen, and that price just went up." The diner had gone completely silent now. Everyone was watching, but no one was moving. The nurses stared at their plates. The construction workers suddenly found their phones fascinating. The businessman had closed his laptop and was edging toward the door. This was New York. People minded their business. Getting involved meant becoming a target, meant inviting trouble into your life, meant risking everything for a stranger you'd never see again. Evan understood that logic, respected it even. He had a son who needed him. Danny was 13 at that crucial age where a boy became a man, where having a father present meant everything. Danny had already lost his mother to divorce, lost their family home, lost the stability every kid deserved. He couldn't lose his father too. But Evan also understood what happened when everyone looked away. He'd seen it in the eyes of victims he'd pulled from burning buildings during his 15 years with the FDNY, that moment when they realized no one was coming. When they understood they were alone in the world, that all the invisible contracts of human civilization meant nothing when convenience outweighed compassion. He'd seen it in his grandmother's eyes during her last days in the hospital, when the nurses were too busy and the doctors too rushed, when she'd needed someone to hold her hand and tell her she mattered. He'd been there, but barely, racing from shifts, exhausted, stretched too thin, and he'd promised her in those final moments that he'd be better, that he'd see people, that he'd matter. "The payment is $35,000, the bald man said, his voice hardening. "Cash. By midnight tonight, or we visit your store tomorrow, and we won't be alone." Mrs. Chen was openly crying now, her small frame shaking with sobs that she tried to muffle behind her napkin. "I don't have it. I don't have anything. Please, I'm trying." "Trying isn't enough," fire hydrant man said. He reached out, grabbed her wrist, not hard enough to leave a mark, but firm enough to make the point. "Mr. Russo doesn't accept excuses." And that's when Evan stood up. He didn't think about it, didn't plan it, didn't consider the consequences or calculate the odds. He just moved, his body remembering what his mind tried to forget, that there were moments when silence became complicity, when looking away became betrayal, when staying safe meant losing yourself. "Wrong table, wrong day, gentlemen," Evan said quietly, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. All 3 men turned to look at him. He must have seemed unremarkable. 6 feet tall, but not imposing, lean from skipped meals and stress rather than gym routines, wearing a faded denim jacket over a gray t-shirt and jeans that had seen better years. His work boots were scuffed and worn. His face was forgettable except for his eyes, dark brown, almost black, carrying the kind of weight that came from seeing things burn. The thin man with glasses smiled. "This doesn't concern you, friend. Go back to your coffee." "Can't do that," Evan said, walking toward them with steady, measured steps. Not aggressive, not challenging, just present. "The lady clearly needs space to finish her pie." The bald man's scar seemed to deepen as his face darkened. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Maybe not," Evan admitted, stopping about 6 feet away, close enough to act, far enough to seem non-threatening. But I know bullying when I see it, and I know 3-on-1 odds make you feel tough, but they just make you cowards. The temperature in the room dropped even further. The construction workers were whispering urgently among themselves. One of the nurses had her phone out, probably calling 911. The businessman had vanished entirely. Fire hydrant man cracked his knuckles, the sound like breaking branches. "You just made a very big mistake, friend." "Wouldn't be my first," Evan said. He shifted his weight slightly, his body remembering training from another lifetime. Defensive tactics classes, hand-to-hand combat scenarios in confined spaces, the brutal efficiency required when seconds meant lives. But before this gets ugly, ask yourselves, is $35,000 worth explaining to your boss why you made the evening news? The thin man's smile widened. Bold words from a man who looks like he works at Jiffy Lube. "I'm a mechanic," Evan corrected mildly. "Parts auto repair over on Amsterdam. I fix things that are broken, including situations like this." Mrs. Chen had stopped crying, was staring at him with a mixture of hope and terror. She knew what happened to people who stood up to men like this. She'd probably seen it before, in whatever neighborhood she'd immigrated from, in whatever life she'd built and rebuilt and built again. The bald man took a step toward Evan. "Last chance to walk away." "I'm giving you the same option," Evan replied. "Walk out that door, leave Mrs. Chen alone, and we all go home tonight without regrets." "You don't know who you're protecting," the bald man said, his voice dropping to a growl. "Mrs. Chen here borrowed money from very serious people, money that came with very serious terms. She knew what she was signing up for." "Did she?" Evan asked, his eyes flicking to the elderly woman. "Did someone explain it to her in her language? Did someone make sure she understood the interest rates, the penalties, the consequences? Or did someone just shove papers in front of her when she was desperate to pay for her grandson's chemo?" The thin man's smile finally cracked. "How did you—" "I didn't," Evan admitted. "But desperation has a look, and predators have a pattern. You find people who are drowning, and instead of throwing them a rope, you tie anchors to their ankles." "Righteous," the bald man sneered. "We got ourselves a hero, boys. Been a while since I met one of those. They usually don't last long." Something flickered across Evan's face. Pain, memory, something old and sharp. "Yeah," he said softly. "I've noticed that too." The fire hydrant man moved first, stepping around the booth toward Evan with surprising speed for his bulk. Evan didn't flinch. He'd faced down situations far more dangerous than 3 loan sharks in a Manhattan diner. He'd walked into buildings that were actively collapsing, had carried unconscious victims through superheated smoke that seared his lungs, had made split-second decisions where the wrong choice meant death. 3 men in suits didn't scare him. Nothing much scared him anymore except the things he couldn't fight: cancer, time, the gradual erosion of hope. But then the thin man spoke, and his voice carried something new: curiosity. "Wait," he said, studying Evan more closely. "You look familiar. Where do I know you from?" Evan's jaw tightened. "You don't?" "No, I definitely—" The thin man pulled out his phone, started scrolling. "What's your name?" "Irrelevant," Evan said. "Evan Hart," Mrs. Chen whispered, reading his name from a work order that had fallen from his jacket pocket when he stood. "It says Evan Hart." The thin man's fingers flew across his screen, then his eyes widened. He turned the phone toward the other 2 men, and Evan watched their faces change, confusion shifting to recognition, then to something like uncertainty. "Holy shit," the bald man breathed. "You're the—" "I'm nobody," Evan cut in sharply. "I'm just a guy who wants to finish his coffee in peace. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk out that door. Mrs. Chen is going to finish her pie. And whatever debt she owes, you're going to tell your boss it's forgiven." "That's not how this works," Fire Hydrant Man protested, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Make it work," Evan said. "Because if you don't, I'm going to make a phone call. And trust me, there are people at the district attorney's office who would love to know about Mr. Russo's lending practices. People who owe me favors, people who won't ask questions when I hand them a case tied up with a bow." It was a bluff. Mostly. Evan didn't have connections at the DA's office anymore. He'd burned most of his bridges when he left the department, when the psych eval came back with words like trauma response and survivor's guilt and unfit for duty. But these men didn't know that. They only knew what the phone had shown them. Whatever news story or social media post that had his face attached to something significant. The thin man studied Evan for a long moment, his expression unreadable behind his glasses. Then he nodded slowly. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "You just made an enemy, Mr. Hart." "Get in line," Evan replied. The three men exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. Then the bald man gestured toward the door. "Let's go. We'll report back to Mr. Russo. Let him decide how to handle this." "You do that," Evan said. They walked toward the exit, their expensive shoes clicking in the silence. But at the door, the thin man turned back. "You know, Mr. Hart, sometimes heroes become liabilities. Sometimes the people they save become targets. You might want to think about that." "I think about it every day," Evan said truthfully. Then they were gone, the door chiming behind them, and the diner erupted into nervous chatter. The nurses were talking excitedly, their phones out recording everything. The construction workers were debating whether they should have stepped in. The cook had emerged from the kitchen, a baseball bat in his hands, too late to help but ready to try. Mrs. Chen was crying again, but differently now. Relief mixed with fear, gratitude tangled with worry. She stood up on shaking legs and approached Evan, her small hands reaching for his. "Thank you," she whispered in heavily accented English. "Thank you, thank you. You didn't have to—" "Yes, I did," Evan said gently, squeezing her hands. They were cold and fragile, like bird bones. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" No hurt," she said quickly. "Just scared. They come every week, threaten my store, threaten my family. I borrow money for my grandson's treatment, and they say I owe triple now. I don't have it. I don't know what to do." "Do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight?" Evan asked. "Those men might come back or send others." Mrs. Chen's face crumpled. "My store is my home. I live in an apartment upstairs." Evan thought quickly. "Is there someone you can call? Family? Friends?" "My daughter in California, but she worked 2 jobs. My grandson, he's still sick. I don't want to worry them." One of the nurses approached, a kind-faced woman with dark skin and tired eyes. "I'm Rebecca," she said, "from St. Catherine's. If you need a place tonight, the hospital has emergency housing for situations like this. It's not much, but it's safe." Mrs. Chen looked between them, her eyes shining with tears. "Why you help me? You don't know me." "Because it's the right thing to do," Rebecca said simply, "and because we've all needed help at some point." "I'll call you a cab," Evan offered. "Make sure you get there safely." Mrs. Chen grabbed his hand again, pressed something into his palm, a small jade pendant on a red cord. "My mother gave me," she said, "for protection. You take. You need more than me now." "Mrs. Chen, I can't—" "Please," she insisted. "Those men, they not forget. They come for you now. You need all protection you can get." Evan wanted to refuse, but the look in her eyes stopped him. This wasn't about the pendant's value. It was about dignity, about maintaining agency in a situation where she'd had none. So he closed his fingers around it and nodded. "Thank you. I'll keep it safe." Rebecca helped Mrs. Chen gather her things. A worn purse, a phone with a cracked screen, a plastic bag with what looked like groceries. Evan called a cab, paid the driver in advance, watched through the window until the taillights disappeared into Manhattan traffic. Then he turned back to find the diner's manager standing behind him, a middle-aged man with an impressive mustache and suspicious eyes. "You need to leave," he said without preamble. "What?" "Those men. They're connected. You just brought trouble to my door. I can't have that. I got a business to run, employees to protect. So finish your coffee and don't come back." Evan felt the words like a punch. This had been his place, his sanctuary, the one spot where he could breathe for 2 hours every week. But he understood. Fear made people cruel. Survival made them selfish. The manager had a family too, a mortgage, Dreams that didn't include getting crossways with organized crime. I understand, Evan said quietly. He pulled a 20 from his wallet, left it on the counter even though his coffee had been $4. Take care of yourself. He walked out into the October night, the city sounds washing over him, sirens in the distance, car horns and shouting, the rumble of subway trains beneath the streets. The air was crisp and sharp, carrying the smell of roasting chestnuts from a street vendor and exhaust from passing buses. Evan stood on the sidewalk for a moment, Mrs. Chen's jade pendant warm against his palm. What had he done? He'd made himself visible, had put a target on his back, had potentially endangered Danny. For what? To help a stranger he'd never see again? To chase some ghost of who he used to be? His phone buzzed. A text from Danny. Robotics ran late. Can you pick me up? Evan's chest tightened. Danny, his son. The only thing in his life that mattered. The only reason he got up in the morning. The only future he cared about. And he'd just risked it all for a woman he didn't know, facing men he couldn't beat, defending principles that the world had forgotten mattered. He texted back, on my way, be there in 15. As he walked toward the subway, Evan tried to convince himself that it would be fine. The men would report back to their boss, who would decide Evan wasn't worth the trouble. Mrs. Chen would get help from the hospital, maybe find a way out of her debt. Life would return to its quiet, careful routine. Work at the garage, dinners with Danny, the slow process of rebuilding something that resembled normal. But he knew better. He'd seen the thin man's eyes, the calculation there. He'd heard the threat about heroes becoming liabilities, about the saved becoming targets. Men like that didn't forget. Men like that kept ledgers, balanced books, collected debts. And Evan had just written a check his body couldn't cash. 3 days later, the city showed him how right he was. Evan was under a Honda Civic, his hands black with grease, replacing a transmission that had more problems than solutions when his phone rang. He almost didn't answer. He was in the zone, his mind focused on the mechanical puzzle, the simple cause and effect of broken parts and fixed systems. But something made him roll out from under the car and check the screen. Unknown number. Hearts Auto Repair, Yi, he answered, wedging the phone between his ear and shoulder while wiping his hands on a rag that was more oil than cloth. Mr. Hart, a woman's voice, professional and urgent. This is Sarah Goldstein from Metropolitan General Hospital. We have a patient here asking for you. Evan's blood went cold. Danny was at school. His ex-wife was in Connecticut. His parents were dead, his grandmother buried. Who? She wouldn't give her name. She just said to call Evan Hart, the man from the fire. She said you'd remember. The fire. But which fire? Evan had fought hundreds during his years with FDNY, had pulled dozens of people from buildings that were trying to kill them both. Why would one of them be calling now, 3 years after he'd left the department? Mr. Hart, are you there? Yeah, he managed. What's her condition? Critical but stable. She was brought in this morning from a high-rise fire on East 58th Street. She's been asking for you since she regained consciousness. Can you come? Evan looked around the garage, 3 cars waiting for repairs, a full afternoon of work, bills that wouldn't pay themselves. But the woman on the phone sounded serious, and someone was asking for him. Someone who remembered him from the fire. I'll be there in 30 minutes, he said. He cleaned up quickly, told his assistant Marcus to handle things, then drove his beat-up Ford pickup through midday Manhattan traffic with the kind of controlled urgency that came from years of emergency response. His mind raced through possibilities, trying to place which fire she might be from, which rescue might have left such an impression that she'd ask for him years later. Metropolitan General's emergency room smelled like antiseptic and fear, a combination Evan knew too well from visiting colleagues who'd been injured on calls, from those final days with his grandmother. He approached the desk where Sarah Goldstein, a tired-looking woman with graying hair and kind eyes, waited with a clipboard. Mr. Hart, she confirmed. That's me. What room? Before you see her, I need to explain something. Sarah's voice dropped. The patient, she's in rough shape. Second-degree burns on her arms and legs, smoke inhalation, possible head trauma from debris. She's sedated for pain, but she was very insistent about seeing you. Do you have any idea why? Evan shook his head. Not until I see her. Sarah led him through the maze of the ER, past curtained beds where people groaned and cried, past doctors shouting orders and nurses running with IV bags. They stopped at a private room at the end of the hall, and through the small window in the door, Evan saw a figure wrapped in bandages connected to beeping machines that monitored her tenuous grip on life. "We're trying to identify her," Sarah said. "No ID, no wallet, just a jade pendant on a red cord that she refused to let us remove." Evan's heart stopped. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the identical pendant Mrs. Chen had given him 3 nights ago. "Oh my God," he whispered. "You know her?" "Mrs. Chen. Her name is Mrs. Chen. She owns a grocery store in Chinatown." Evan's hands were shaking. "The fire. Was it arson?" Sarah's face confirmed what he already knew. "Fire marshal suspects accelerant. Someone wanted that building to burn." Evan's vision went red around the edges. $35,000. "Wrong table, wrong day, gentlemen. You just made an enemy, Mr. Hart. Sometimes the people they save become targets." "Where's her family?" he managed to ask. "We're trying to reach them. The phone we found was too damaged to access." Sarah paused. "Mr. Hart, do you know why someone would do this?" "Yes," Evan said grimly. "Because I got involved." He pushed through the door before Sarah could stop him. The room was small and sterile, filled with the sounds of machines breathing for a woman who couldn't breathe on her own. Mrs. Chen looked so much smaller than she had in the diner, so fragile against the white sheets, her face obscured by an oxygen mask and bandages. But her eyes were open, and when they found Evan, they widened with recognition and something else. Not blame, relief. "Mrs. Chen," Evan said, pulling a chair close to her bed. "I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I should have—" She tried to speak, but the oxygen mask muffled her words. Evan looked at Sarah, who carefully lifted the mask just enough for Mrs. Chen to whisper. "Not your fault," she managed, each word clearly painful. "They would have come anyway. You gave me 3 more days. 3 days to say goodbye to my grandson. He's in remission, they told me, yesterday." Tears burned Evan's eyes. "Your store, just building," she whispered. "But you reminded me there are still good people. Thank you for seeing me." Her eyes closed, and Sarah quickly replaced the oxygen mask. "She needs to rest," she said firmly. "I'll call you if there's any change." Evan nodded numbly. He left the hospital in a daze, walked 6 blocks before he even realized he was walking, his mind replaying the scene in the diner, analyzing every choice he'd made, every word he'd spoken. If he'd stayed silent, would Mrs. Chen's store still be standing? If he'd minded his own business, would she be breathing on her own? But even as he asked the questions, he knew the answer. Men like that didn't need excuses. They burned what they wanted burned, hurt who they wanted hurt. Evan's intervention hadn't caused this. It had just accelerated a timeline that was already set. Still, the guilt was crushing. He'd promised himself no more heroics, no more saving people, no more getting involved in things that would come back to haunt him. And at the first test, he'd broken that promise. Now an innocent woman was fighting for her life because he couldn't stay in his lane. His phone rang again. Another unknown number. "What?" he answered sharply. "Mr. Hart." The voice was smooth, cultured, carrying the confidence of someone who'd never heard the word no. "My name is Vincent Russo. I believe you met some of my associates earlier this week." Evan's blood turned to ice. "What do you want?" "Just to talk, man to man, professional to professional. You made quite an impression on my employees, Mr. Hart. The hero firefighter, defender of the weak. It's almost noble, if it wasn't so stupidly suicidal." "If this is about Mrs. Chen—" "Oh, that unfortunate fire?" Russo's voice dripped with false sympathy. "Terrible thing. Old buildings, faulty wiring, happens all the time in this city. But no, I'm not calling about that. I'm calling to make you an offer." "Not interested." "You haven't heard it yet. See, Mr. Hart, you cost me money. Mrs. Chen's debt, plus the expense of making an example, plus the headache of dealing with you. That's a lot of red in my ledger, But I'm a businessman. I believe in opportunity. So here's my offer. Work for me. Evan actually laughed, a harsh sound with no humor. You're insane. Am I? Think about it. You're wasting your talents fixing cars for minimum wage. You've got skills, situational awareness, physical capabilities, willingness to step into dangerous situations. I could use someone like that. The pay would be excellent. Your son would want for nothing. The mention of Danny made Evan's vision go white. If you go anywhere near my son— Relax, Mr. Hart. I'm making an offer, not a threat. Though I will say, single fathers have a lot to think about. College tuition, medical bills, the general expense of raising a child in this city. It would be a shame if something interfered with your ability to provide. I'd rather die. That can be arranged too, Russo said pleasantly. But let's not be hasty. Take a few days to think about it. Consider your options. And Mr. Hart, stay out of my business. The next person you try to save might not survive. The line went dead. Evan stood on the sidewalk, phone in hand, rage and fear warring in his chest. He wanted to smash something, wanted to drive to wherever Russo lived and show him what happened when you threatened a man's child. But he wasn't that person anymore. He was a mechanic, a father, someone who'd left the fight behind. Except the fight had found him anyway. His phone buzzed with a text from Danny. Can we get pizza tonight? I aced my math test. Evan stared at the message, at the simple joy of a 13-year-old boy who still believed the world was safe, who still thought his father could protect him from anything. And he realized he was at a crossroads. He could run, pack up Danny, leave the city, start over somewhere Russo's reach didn't extend. He could comply, take the dirty job, become complicit in the same crimes he'd tried to stop. Or he could fight, dig in his heels, protect the people Russo threatened, become the hero he'd sworn he'd never be again. All three options ended badly. He knew that. But only one let him look at himself in the mirror. Only one let him sleep at night without seeing Mrs. Chen's burned face in his dreams. Only one made him the kind of father Danny deserved. Evan texted back, "Pizza sounds great. Be home by 6. Love you." Then he made a phone call to a number he'd sworn he'd never dial again. It rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. "Hart? That really you?" "Yeah, Captain, it's me. I need a favor." "Last time you needed a favor, you ended 3 careers and burned half the department. Give me one reason I should help you." Evan looked at Mrs. Chen's jade pendant, still warm in his pocket. "Because someone needs saving, and I can't do it alone." There was a long pause. Then, "Where are you?" And just like that, Evan Hart stepped back into the fire. Captain James Morrison arrived in an unmarked sedan 20 minutes later, pulling up to the curb where Evan waited with the kind of precision that spoke to decades of emergency response. He was 62 now, his hair completely white, his face mapped with lines that told stories of every fire he'd commanded, every life lost under his watch. He'd been Evan's mentor once, back when Evan believed he could save everyone, back before the warehouse fire changed everything. Morrison stepped out of the car, his eyes scanning Evan with the critical assessment of a man who'd seen too many good firefighters break. "You look like hell, Hart." "Feel worse," Evan admitted. "Thanks for coming." "Don't thank me yet. I haven't decided if I'm helping or arresting you." Morrison gestured to the car. "Get in. We're not having this conversation on the street." They drove in silence through Manhattan traffic, Morrison navigating with the casual expertise of someone who'd spent 40 years responding to emergencies in this city. He didn't ask where they were going, didn't demand explanations. That wasn't how Morrison worked. He gathered information first, made decisions after. They ended up at a small park near the waterfront, one of those forgotten green spaces tucked between industrial buildings where dock workers took lunch breaks and homeless people slept on benches. Morrison parked and turned off the engine. "Talk," he said. So Evan did. He told Morrison about the diner, about Mrs. Chen and the 3 men in suits, about the threat and his intervention. He told him about the phone call from the hospital, about the arson, about Vincent Russo's offer. He left nothing out, didn't try to make himself look better or smarter or less culpable. Morrison had always been able to smell bullshit from 3 blocks away. When Evan finished, Morrison sat in silence for a long moment, his thick fingers drumming against the steering wheel. Finally, he said, "You always did have a talent for stepping in shit. It's a gift." It's a curse, Morrison corrected. Same curse that made you a hell of a firefighter and a terrible human being at staying alive. He turned to face Evan fully. Vincent Russo isn't some two-bit loan shark. He's connected, real connected. The kind of connected that means bodies disappear and investigations go nowhere. You're picking a fight you can't win. I know. Do you? Because the last time you decided to be a hero, 6 people died, including Tommy. The name hit Evan like a physical blow. Tommy Breslin, his partner, his best friend, the man who'd followed him into that warehouse because Evan had been so damn sure there was someone still inside, someone who needed saving. There hadn't been. Just old furniture and 20 years of accumulated trash and accelerant-soaked walls that turned the whole structure into a death trap. Tommy had made it out with burns over 60% of his body. He'd lasted 3 days in the ICU, conscious enough to know he was dying, conscious enough to see his wife and 2 daughters say goodbye. The official investigation had cleared Evan of wrongdoing. It was a judgment call, they said, the kind firefighters made every day. But Evan knew the truth. He'd been reckless, overconfident. He'd trusted his instincts over protocol, and Tommy had paid the price. That's not fair, Evan said quietly. Life's not fair, Morrison shot back. You think I don't know that? You think I don't carry every firefighter I ever lost? But I learned something you never did, Hart. You can't save everyone. And trying to will just get more people killed. So what am I supposed to do? Let Russo burn down buildings? Let him threaten families? You're supposed to call the police. Let them handle it. Evan laughed bitterly. You really think the NYPD is going to take down someone like Russo based on my word? A washed-up firefighter with PTSD and a history of poor decisions? They'll file a report and forget about it by morning. Morrison didn't argue because they both knew it was true. New York's finest were good at what they did, but organized crime investigations took months, years sometimes. Resources were limited, priorities shifted. Mrs. Chen would be a footnote, another victim of urban violence, her store another statistic. Then what do you want from me? Morrison asked. Information, access. You still have contacts in the department, the fire marshal's office, arson investigation. I need to know everything about that fire on East 58th Street. I need to know if there's a pattern, if Russo's done this before. And I need it off the books. You're asking me to risk my pension for a woman you met once and a fight that's not yours. I'm asking you to help me do what we both swore we'd do when we joined the department. Protect and serve. Save lives. Make the city safer. Evan met Morrison's eyes. You taught me that. You told me the job wasn't about following orders. It was about doing what's right even when it's hard. I also told you that martyrs don't get to see their kids grow up, Morrison said. How's Danny? The change in subject was deliberate. Morrison knew exactly which buttons to push. He's good. He aced his math test. We're getting pizza tonight. And if Russo comes after him? If your crusade puts Danny in the crosshairs? Evan's jaw tightened. That's why I need your help, to make sure it doesn't come to that. Morrison stared out the windshield at the gray water of the East River, watching cargo ships move with ponderous grace. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. I've got a grandson, Lucas. He's 12. Smart as hell, wants to be a marine biologist. His dad, my son, he's a cop in Brooklyn. Good cop, honest. And every day I worry that his integrity is going to get him killed, that some scumbag with a badge is going to decide he's too much of a liability, that my daughter-in-law is going to get a phone call that changes everything. I didn't know, Evan said. Why would you? You disappeared after the evaluation, changed your number, didn't come to Tommy's memorial. Far as the department was concerned, Evan Hart ceased to exist. Morrison turned to look at him. But I kept tabs, made sure you landed somewhere safe, made sure you were taking care of Danny. That's what I do for the people I care about, even when they don't deserve it. Evan felt his throat tighten. I didn't know how to face them, Tommy's family, the guys from the station. I killed their friend, their father, their husband. What was I supposed to say? You were supposed to say you're sorry. You were supposed to show up and let them see you were hurting too. You were supposed to be there, Hart. That's what family does. Morrison's voice hardened. But you ran, like you're running now, just in a different direction. You think fighting Russo is going to make up for Tommy? You think saving Mrs. Chen balances some cosmic ledger? No, Evan admitted. I think I'm tired of running. I think I'm tired of looking away. And I think if I don't do something, I won't be able to look at my son without seeing a coward in the mirror. Morrison was quiet for a long time. Then he reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a manila folder. Fire Marshal's preliminary report on East 58th Street. Don't ask how I got it. The official finding is accidental, faulty wiring in a 100-year-old building. But between you and me, the accelerant patterns don't match the narrative. Someone wanted that fire hot and fast. Evan took the folder with shaking hands. Thank you. Don't thank me. This doesn't exist. I never gave it to you. And Hart? Morrison started the engine. Be smart about this. Russo's people are professionals. They've been doing this longer than you've been alive. If you're going to poke that bear, make sure you've got an exit strategy. Working on it, Evan lied. Morrison drove him back to where his truck was parked. As Evan climbed out, the older man called after him. Tommy's daughter, Sarah, she graduated Columbia last year, top of her class. She's a prosecutor now, working in the Manhattan DA's office. She asked about you once, asked if you were okay. Evan froze. What did you tell her? I told her you were surviving, but Hart, there's a difference between surviving and living. Figure out which one you want. The sedan pulled away, leaving Evan alone with the folder and his thoughts. He sat in his truck for 10 minutes, building the courage to open it. When he finally did, the photographs inside made his stomach turn. Mrs. Chen's building had been gutted. The fire had started on the first floor, her grocery store, and spread upward with terrifying speed. The accelerant patterns were obvious to anyone who knew what to look for. Splash marks near the entrance, concentrated burn areas that indicated multiple ignition points, the distinctive pour patterns of gasoline or similar petroleum products. But what made Evan's blood run cold were the photographs of the second and third floors, residential apartments. And according to the report, 3 families had been home when the fire started. They'd escaped thanks to a passing patrol car and the quick response of Engine Company 54. But it had been close. Too close. Russo hadn't just tried to kill Mrs. Chen. He'd been willing to burn an entire building, risk dozens of lives just to make a point. And the message was clear. This is what happens when you interfere with my business. Evan's phone buzzed. A text from Danny. Almost home. Can we watch that documentary about Mars? He typed back, absolutely. I'll grab the pizza on my way. He drove to Danny's school, the folder burning like evidence on the passenger seat. His mind was racing through scenarios, calculations, possibilities. Morrison was right. Russo was a professional, connected and protected. Taking him down through legal channels would require evidence that didn't exist, witnesses who wouldn't testify, investigations that would be shut down by people with more authority than scruples. But Evan had learned something during his 15 years with the FDNY. Fire didn't care about connections. Fire was democratic. It burned the guilty and innocent with equal enthusiasm. And sometimes, the only way to stop a fire from spreading was to create a bigger one, a controlled burn that consumed everything in its path and left nothing but ash. He was so lost in thought that he almost missed the black SUV following him. Almost. But 3 years of looking over his shoulder, 3 years of low-grade paranoia about when his past would catch up, had honed his situational awareness to a razor's edge. The SUV stayed 3 cars back, matching his speed, following his turns. Russo's people. Making sure he understood he was being watched. Evan's grip tightened on the steering wheel. He couldn't lead them to Danny's school. Couldn't let them know anything about his son, where he went to school, what time classes ended, what route they took home. That information was a weapon, and Evan had already given them too much. He took a sudden right turn, cutting across 2 lanes of traffic to a chorus of angry horns. The SUV tried to follow, but got caught at a red light. Evan punched the accelerator, his old truck protesting but responding, putting distance between himself and his tail. He took 3 more turns, threading through side streets he knew from years of emergency responses, until he was certain he'd lost them. Then he parked 2 blocks from Danny's school and walked the rest of the way, the folder hidden under his jacket. He arrived just as the final bell rang, watching from across the street as students poured out like water from a broken dam. Danny emerged in a cluster of friends, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his face animated as he argued some point with a tall kid wearing a Knicks jersey. Evan's heart clenched. His son. 13 years old and already showing signs of the man he'd become. Confident, smart, kind in the way that came from being raised by a single father who tried his best and failed often. Danny had his mother's blonde hair and blue eyes, her easy smile and social grace, but he had Evan's stubbornness, his need to fix things, his inability to ignore injustice. Danny spotted him and waved, said something to his friends that made them laugh, then jogged across the street. "Hey, Dad, you're early." "Slow day at the shop," Evan lied. "Thought I'd surprise you. How was the test?" "Crushed it. Mr. Peterson said I might be the first student to get a perfect score on that unit in like 5 years. Danny grinned with the unself-conscious pride of someone who hadn't learned to hide his accomplishments yet. "Can we go to Mario's? They've got that new pizza with the stuffed crust." "Whatever you want, champ." They walked to the truck together, Danny chattering about his day, the test, the robotics club project, some drama involving 2 kids in his English class who may or may not be dating. Normal things. Teenager things. The kind of problems that felt enormous when you were 13 but would be forgotten in a week. Evan tried to focus, tried to be present, but part of his mind was still scanning the street, looking for black SUVs, watching for threats. He'd brought this to their door. His choice in the diner, his inability to stay silent, had put Danny at risk, and now he had to figure out how to protect his son while also protecting Mrs. Chen and whoever else Russo decided to target next. They reached the truck, and Danny paused with his hand on the door. "Dad? You okay? You seem kind of distracted." "Just thinking about work," Evan said, forcing a smile. "Nothing important. Come on, let's get that pizza." Mario's was crowded with the after-school rush, kids and parents competing for tables, the air thick with the smell of garlic and melted cheese and teenage energy. They managed to snag a booth in the back, and Danny ordered the stuffed crust special while Evan got his usual, plain cheese, because his appetite had vanished somewhere between the hospital and Morrison's car. While they waited, Danny pulled out his phone and started showing Evan pictures from Robotics Club. Their team was building an autonomous rover for a regional competition, and Danny had been put in charge of the navigation system. The picture showed a complicated mess of wires and circuits and 3D printed parts that somehow were supposed to make the thing move. "It's pretty cool," Danny said, his enthusiasm infectious. "We're using Arduino boards and these ultrasonic sensors that can detect obstacles up to like 20 feet away. And I wrote the code that lets it map the arena in real time. Mr. Johnson thinks we might actually have a shot at placing this year." "That's amazing, Danny. I'm proud of you." "You always say that." Danny grinned. "Even when I mess up." "That's because being proud isn't about perfection. It's about effort, and you always give it everything you've got." Evan reached across the table, squeezed his son's shoulder. "That's what matters." The pizza arrived, and they ate in comfortable silence for a while. But Evan could feel Danny studying him, could sense the questions building behind those intelligent blue eyes. His son had always been perceptive, had always been able to read Evan's moods like a weather report. Finally, Danny said, "Something happened today, didn't it?" Evan looked up from his pizza. "What makes you say that?" "You've got that look, the one you get when you're worried but trying not to show it, and you keep checking your phone, and you looked at every car in the parking lot before we went inside." Danny set down his slice. "Is it about Mom?" No, your mom's fine. This is just work stuff." "You're a terrible liar, Dad." Evan couldn't help but smile. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart. You just notice it more now that I'm taller than you." "You're not taller than me." "Give it 6 months." Danny's expression turned serious. "But really, if something's wrong, you can tell me. I'm not a kid anymore." Evan wanted to argue that Danny was exactly a kid, that he had years before he needed to worry about things like loan sharks and arson and moral compromises. But he also knew his son deserved honesty, deserved to be treated with respect even when the truth was complicated. "I helped someone a few days ago," Evan said carefully. "Someone who was in trouble. And now the people who were causing that trouble are mad at me." Danny nodded slowly. "Like when you used to help people from fires?" "Sort of. Except these people, they don't play by rules. They're dangerous. Evan met his son's eyes. I need you to be careful for a while. Pay attention to your surroundings. If you see anyone following you, or if anyone approaches you asking about me, I want you to call me immediately, and don't go anywhere alone after school. Fear flickered across Danny's face, quickly replaced by something that looked like determination. Are we in danger? I'm not going to let anything happen to you, Evan said firmly. I promise. That's not what I asked. Evan sighed. I don't know. Maybe. I'm taking precautions and I've got people helping me. But until this is resolved, we need to be smart. Should we leave? Go stay with Mom for a while? The fact that Danny's first thought was practicality rather than panic made Evan's heart swell with pride and break with guilt in equal measure. Not yet, but it's an option if things get worse. Danny absorbed this, his young face suddenly looking much older. The person you helped, are they okay? She's in the hospital, but she's tough. I think she'll make it. Good. Danny picked up his pizza again, but his appetite was clearly gone. You did the right thing, Dad, even if it's dangerous. You always told me that doing the right thing isn't always easy, that sometimes it costs something. I did say that, Evan admitted, though I'm starting to wonder if that advice was more aspirational than practical. What does aspirational mean? It means I tell you to be better than I am. Danny shook his head. You're better than you think. You just forget sometimes. They finished their pizza with lighter conversation. The Mars documentary Danny wanted to watch, a book Evan was reading about motorcycle repair, weekend plans that suddenly felt fragile and uncertain. When they got home to their small two-bedroom apartment in Washington Heights, Evan did a complete security check while Danny was in the bathroom. He checked the locks, the windows, the fire escape. Everything was secure. Everything was fine. But fine was a relative term when you'd made enemies of professional criminals. The documentary was good, something about rovers on Mars and the search for ancient water, narrated by someone with a soothing British accent. Danny sprawled on the couch with his head on Evan's shoulder, the way he used to when he was little, before divorce and puberty had made physical affection complicated. Evan tried to focus on the science, the images of red rocks and distant horizons, but his mind kept drifting to Mrs. Chen in her hospital bed, to Russo's smooth voice making threats, to the black SUV following him through Manhattan. Around 9, Danny went to bed. Evan tucked him in, an old ritual they'd maintained even as Danny protested he was too old for it, and stood in the doorway for a moment, watching his son's chest rise and fall with the easy breathing of someone who still felt safe in the world. Then he went to the kitchen table and opened Morrison's folder again. He studied the photographs, the patterns, the evidence that screamed arson but would never make it to court. He thought about Russo's offer, about taking dirty money to protect his son. He thought about Mrs. Chen's jade pendant, still in his pocket, and what it meant to accept protection you didn't deserve. His phone rang at 10:47 p.m. Unknown number. Evan considered not answering, but curiosity and dread made him swipe accept. Mr. Hart. Not Russo this time. The thin man with glasses from the diner. I hope I'm not interrupting family time. What do you want? Just checking in, making sure you're considering Mr. Russo's offer carefully. Have you given it any thought? I told Russo no. That hasn't changed. That's unfortunate. You see, Mr. Hart, Mr. Russo is a patient man, but his patience has limits, and those limits include making sure that people who disrespect him understand the consequences. Evan's hand tightened on the phone. If you threaten my son, why would we do that? The thin man sounded genuinely confused. We're not monsters, Mr. Hart. We don't hurt children. But there are other ways to make a point. Other people you care about. Like that captain you met with today? James Morrison, retired fire captain, lives in Astoria with his wife of 38 years. Or that nurse from the hospital, Rebecca Santos, single mother of 2, works double shifts to pay rent. Or even that assistant at your garage, Marcus Webb, trying to save money for his wedding. The blood drained from Evan's face. They'd been watching him, following him, documenting everyone he spoke to, everyone he cared about, building a map of his life that they could use against him. You made your point, Evan said through clenched teeth. Have I? Because I don't think you understand yet. This isn't about you anymore, Mr. Hart. This is about everyone you touch. Every person you try to save becomes a target. Every connection you make becomes a liability. You wanted to be a hero? Heroes get people killed. You know that better than anyone." The line went dead. Evan sat in his dark kitchen, the phone still pressed to his ear, rage and fear fighting for dominance in his chest. They were right. Everyone he tried to protect, everyone he brought into this, became collateral damage. Morrison, Rebecca, Marcus, innocent people who'd done nothing except be kind or helpful or unlucky enough to cross his path. He thought about running, taking Danny and disappearing into some small town where Russo's reach didn't extend. But that was cowardice, and it left everyone else behind. He thought about compliance, taking Russo's job, becoming part of the machine. But that was surrender, and it meant Danny would grow up watching his father compromise every principle he'd ever taught. Or he could fight. But fighting meant accepting that people might get hurt, might die. Tommy had died because Evan was so sure he was right. How many more would follow? Evan pulled out Mrs. Chen's jade pendant, turned it over in his scarred hands. Protection, she'd called it. It's a mother's gift passed down through generations, offered to a stranger because he'd stood when others sat. And now that stranger had to decide if her faith was misplaced, if protection was even possible in a world where kindness made you a target. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Just a photo. Morrison's house. The lights on, his car in the driveway. And a timestamp, 10:52 p.m. The message was clear. We know where everyone is. We can reach them anytime we want. Your move. Evan stared at the photo for a long time. Then he made a decision that would either save everyone or doom them all. He dialed a number he'd found in Morrison's folder, one that had been underlined 3 times as if the captain had wanted to make sure Evan saw it. It rang twice before a woman's voice answered. Professional, alert. Manhattan District Attorney's Office, how may I direct your call? Sarah Breslin, Evan said, his voice steady despite the fear. Tell her Evan Hart needs to talk. Tell her it's about her father. There was a pause, then, please hold. While Evan waited, listening to generic hold music that felt absurdly normal given the circumstances, he thought about Tommy, about his partner's last words in the ICU, when the morphine had worn off enough for him to speak, but not enough to dull the agony. Tommy had gripped Evan's hand with what little strength he had left and whispered, "Don't let this break you. Don't let my girls grow up thinking their dad died for nothing. Promise me." Evan had promised, and then he'd broken that promise by running, by hiding, by refusing to let Tommy's death mean something beyond tragedy. But maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe he could still keep that promise, still make sure Tommy's daughters knew their father had stood for something worth dying for. The hold music cut off. A new voice came on the line, younger than expected, but carrying unmistakable authority. "Mr. Hart, I honestly never thought I'd hear from you. Sarah, I'm sorry for not being there, for disappearing, for—" "Save it," she interrupted, but her tone wasn't cruel, just practical. "I'm at my desk until midnight working a case. You've got 5 minutes to tell me why you're calling." So Evan did. He told her about Mrs. Chen, about Russo, about the arson, and the threats, and the impossible choice he'd been given. He told her about the people Russo was threatening, about the evidence in Morrison's folder that would never make it to trial through normal channels. And he told her about Tommy, about the promise he'd made and broken, about trying to honor a good man's memory by saving people who needed saving. When he finished, there was silence on the line. Then Sarah said, "My father was the best man I ever knew. He taught me that integrity matters more than comfort, that doing the right thing is worth the cost. That's why I became a prosecutor. That's why I put away people who think money and connections make them untouchable. I know. Your dad would be proud. Don't." Her voice cracked slightly. "Don't talk about him like you knew him. You were there when he died, and then you disappeared. You didn't come to his funeral. You didn't call. You didn't acknowledge that your decision killed him." "You're right," Evan said quietly. "I was a coward. I am a coward. But I'm trying to do better. And I think your father would want you to help, not because of me, but because it's the right thing to do." Another long pause. Evan could hear papers rustling, a pen clicking. the sounds of someone thinking hard about a decision that would have consequences. Finally, Sarah said, "Vincent Russo. I've been trying to build a case against him for 18 months. He's careful, insulated, uses third parties for everything. But if you're willing to work with me, if you're willing to wear a wire and get him on record, I might be able to do something. You want me to get close to him? I want you to give me ammunition. Right now, I've got suspicions and circumstantial evidence. I need confessions. I need him or his people saying things that can't be explained away. Can you do that?" Evan thought about the black SUV, the photo of Morrison's house, the thin man's voice promising that everyone he cared about would become targets. "If I do this, can you protect the people he's threatening?" "I can put them under surveillance. I can make sure patrol cars drive by their houses more often. But Mr. Hart, I'm going to be honest with you. If Russo wants someone hurt badly enough, he'll find a way. The best protection is taking him off the board entirely." "Then let's do that. It won't be easy. It won't be fast. And there's a very real chance you'll get hurt or killed in the process. Are you prepared for that?" "I've been prepared for that since I was 22 and ran into my first burning building," Evan said. "The question is whether you're prepared to see it through. Because if I do this, if I put my life on the line and get you what you need, I want to promise that you'll finish the job. No plea deals, no early releases, no letting him walk because the case got complicated." "I can't make that promise legally." "Then make it as Tommy's daughter. Make it as someone who understands that sometimes the only way to stop a fire is to burn it out completely." Sarah was quiet for so long that Evan thought she'd hung up. Then she said, "My office. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. We'll discuss terms and get you set up with equipment. And Mr. Hart? Don't make me regret this. I'll do my best. That's what my father said, right before you got him killed." She hung up, and Evan sat alone in his kitchen with the weight of old ghosts and new responsibilities pressing down like smoke. He'd just committed to a path that could end in prison or death, had volunteered to step back into the fire he'd sworn to avoid, had risked everything on the chance that justice might actually mean something in a city that had forgotten how to care. But as he looked at Mrs. Chen's jade pendant, at the small piece of hope and protection given freely by someone who had nothing left to give, Evan felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Purpose. Direction. The sense that maybe, just maybe, Tommy's death could still mean something beyond regret. He texted Morrison, "Meeting with Sarah tomorrow. Thanks for the introduction." The response came 30 seconds later. "You're an idiot, but you're our idiot. Be careful." Then Evan did something he hadn't done since before the warehouse fire. He pulled out an old photo album from the back of his closet, one filled with pictures from his years with the FDNY. There was Morrison, younger and stronger, posing with their engine company after a successful rescue. There was Tommy, grinning like an idiot while holding a Dalmatian puppy that someone had brought to the firehouse. There were dozens of faces, brothers and sisters who'd trusted Evan to lead them, to keep them safe, to bring them home. And at the back of the album, tucked into a plastic sleeve, was a newspaper clipping. The headline read, "FDNY Hero Saves Family from 5-Alarm Blaze." Below it was a photo of Evan, younger and unburned, carrying a child out of a collapsing building. He looked confident in that photo, certain, like someone who believed he could save everyone. He'd lost that certainty in the warehouse, lost it in Tommy's eyes as his partner realized he was dying, lost it in the psych evaluation that had ended his career. But maybe certainty wasn't the point. Maybe the point was showing up anyway, stepping into the smoke anyway, trying to save people even when you knew you might fail. Evan closed the album and put it back in the closet. Then he checked on Danny one more time, still sleeping, still safe, still innocent of the war his father had just declared, and tried to convince himself that what he was doing was right. Morning came too quickly. Evan made breakfast, pancakes that Danny loved and Evan couldn't taste, and drove his son to school with extra vigilance, checking his mirrors constantly, taking random turns to ensure they weren't followed. He walked Danny to the entrance, hugged him longer than usual, and said, "I love you, champ. Remember what I said about being careful. Dad, you're being weird. I know. Humor me." Danny rolled his eyes but smiled. "Love you too. See you tonight." Then Evan drove to Lower Manhattan, to the gleaming tower that housed the district attorney's office, where Sarah Breslin waited with equipment and expectations, and the ghost of her father standing between them like smoke that wouldn't clear. He parked in a garage 3 blocks away, paying cash because he didn't want any digital records of his location. He walked the rest of the way, the morning sun bright and indifferent, the city waking up around him like it did every day. Millions of people pursuing their own small dramas, unaware that in one man's chest a war was beginning, that in one prosecutor's office a fight was being planned, that somewhere in Manhattan a criminal was about to learn that some fires couldn't be controlled or contained, that sometimes the only answer to destruction was a bigger, hotter, more complete burn. Evan entered the building, showed ID to security, took an elevator to the 15th floor. The hallway was institutional and fluorescent, lined with offices where lawyers built cases and wrote briefs and tried to convince themselves that justice was possible in a system designed to protect the powerful. Sarah Breslin's office was at the end of the hall, a small space with windows overlooking the street and walls covered with case files and photographs. She looked up when Evan knocked, and for a moment they just stared at each other, the man who'd gotten her father killed and the daughter who'd inherited his mission. She looked like Tommy. Same sharp features, same intelligent eyes, same air of quiet competence. But where Tommy had been warm and open, Sarah was guarded and controlled. Her grief turned into armor. "Mr. Hart," she said formally. "Come in. We have work to do." And Evan stepped through the door, into the fire, toward a reckoning that had been 3 years in the making and would end in either redemption or ruin, with no middle ground and no turning back. Sarah's office smelled like coffee and determination, with undertones of the kind of exhaustion that came from working 80-hour weeks while trying to convince yourself it mattered. She gestured to a chair across from her desk. Standard government issue, uncomfortable by design, and Evan sat while she studied him with the clinical assessment of someone deciding whether he was an asset or a liability. "You look different than I remember," she said finally. "Older, more tired." 3 years will do that," Evan replied, "especially when you spend them trying to forget." "Did it work, the forgetting?" "Not even a little bit." Sarah nodded as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. She opened a file on her desk, thick with papers and photographs, the accumulated evidence of months of investigation, and turned it so Evan could see. The top page showed a surveillance photo of Vincent Russo entering what appeared to be an upscale restaurant, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits. "Vincent Michael Russo," Sarah began, her voice taking on the practiced cadence of a prosecutor presenting evidence. 53 years old, 3rd-generation organized crime. His grandfather ran numbers in Little Italy, his father expanded into construction and waste management, and Vincent took it digital, online lending, cryptocurrency schemes, real estate fraud. He's smart, connected, and completely insulated from his crimes. She flipped to another page showing organizational charts that looked like spider webs. He operates through layers of shell companies and third-party contractors. The men who threatened Mrs. Chen? Not on his payroll. They're independent consultants hired through intermediaries who are hired through other intermediaries. Legally, Russo has never met them. Has no idea they're breaking legs and burning buildings in his name. "Convenient," Evan said. "Brilliant, actually, from a criminal law perspective. We've arrested 17 of his foot soldiers in the past 2 years. Not one has testified against him. They serve their time, get out with 6-figure payments waiting in offshore accounts, and disappear into legitimate businesses that Russo coincidentally helps finance." Evan studied the photographs. Men in suits, women in business casual, all of them looking respectable and ordinary. "So how do we get to him?" "We make him sloppy. We create a situation where he has to get personally involved." Sarah pulled out another file, this one marked with red tags. Mrs. Chen's building wasn't the first. We've documented 11 suspicious fires in the past 18 months, all involving properties where Russo's lending network had financial interests. But in every case, the connection was too tenuous to prosecute. We couldn't prove intent, couldn't establish a pattern that would hold up in court. "But now you have me." "Now I have you," Sarah confirmed. "Someone he's threatened directly. Someone who can testify to personal contact with his organization. And if we play this right, someone who can get him to incriminate himself." She opened a metal case on her desk, revealing what looked like a pen and a watch. "Basic wire equipment. The pen records audio, the watch has a panic button. We'll train you on how to use them, how to guide conversations toward admissible statements, how to stay safe while gathering evidence. Evan picked up the pen, felt its weight. And if Russo figures out I'm wired? Then you'll probably die, Sarah said bluntly. These men don't negotiate. They don't give warnings. You betray them, you disappear. We'll find your body in the Hudson, or we won't find it at all. You're really selling this. I'm being honest. You asked for my help, and I'm giving it. But I need you to understand what you're volunteering for. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her expression softening slightly. My father died because he trusted you to make the right call. I'm not saying that to hurt you. I'm saying it so you understand what's at stake. If you do this, people's lives depend on you being smart and careful and lucky. And if you screw up, I have to live with more bodies on my conscience. Evan met her eyes. I think about your father every day. I see him in my dreams. I hear his voice when I'm trying to sleep, and I know that nothing I do will ever bring him back or make it right. But maybe, just maybe, I can honor what he stood for. Maybe I can make sure his death meant something. His death already meant something, Sarah said quietly. It meant that good men die when they trust the wrong people. The words hit like a punch, but Evan didn't flinch. Then let me prove I'm worth trusting. Let me show you I can finish what I start. Sarah studied him for a long moment, and Evan could see her father in the set of her jaw, the calculation in her eyes. Finally, she nodded. We'll start with basic training today. How to wear the wire, how to activate it, what kinds of statements we need for prosecution. Tomorrow, you'll make contact with Russo's organization. Tell them you've reconsidered his offer, that you want to discuss terms. And if they don't believe me, they will, because desperate men make desperate choices, and we're going to make you look very desperate. She pulled out another file, this one containing financial documents. We're going to leak information that suggests Hart's Auto Repair is failing. Missed payments, tax liens, the kind of financial pressure that would make a single father reconsider his principles. Russo's people will do their homework, see the trail we've created, and believe you're vulnerable. You've thought this through. I've been waiting 18 months for an opportunity like this. I'm not going to waste it. Sarah stood, gathering the files. There's a conference room down the hall. We'll spend the next 4 hours going over procedures, practicing scenarios, making sure you understand exactly what you're doing. And Mr. Hart, if at any point you want to back out, tell me. I'd rather have no case than a dead informant. They spent the morning in that windowless conference room, Sarah drilling Evan on the basics of undercover work, while a technical specialist named Marcus, no relation to his employee, demonstrated the equipment. The pen had to be clicked twice to activate recording. The watch's panic button required pressing and holding for 3 seconds to prevent accidental activation. Both devices transmitted to a receiver that would be monitored by Sarah's team, meaning someone would always be listening, always ready to intervene if things went wrong. The key is natural conversation, Sarah explained, pacing the room with the nervous energy of someone who lived on coffee and conviction. You can't just ask, hey, did you commit arson? Russo's smart enough to recognize interrogation. Instead, you build rapport. You establish common ground. You let him brag about his business, his connections, his power. Men like him love to show off, and that's when they slip. They practice scenarios. Evan playing himself, Sarah playing Russo, running through conversations about money and loyalty and what a man would do to protect his family. It felt artificial at first, mechanical, but gradually Evan found a rhythm. He learned to ask questions that sounded like curiosity rather than investigation, to express admiration that felt sincere even when it made his skin crawl, to be the kind of desperate man that predators loved to recruit. Better, Sarah said after their 4th run-through. You're starting to understand. The goal isn't to get a confession in one conversation. It's to build a relationship over time. Multiple meetings, multiple recordings, a pattern of criminal activity that we can present to a grand jury. How long are we talking? Weeks? Maybe months. This isn't television. Real investigations take time. Evan thought about Mrs. Chen in her hospital bed, about the people Russo was threatening. We might not have months. Then we'll work with what we have. But rushing means mistakes, and mistakes mean you die. Sarah checked her watch. It's almost 1. Take a break. Get something to eat. Be back here at 2 for scenario training. Evan left the conference room with his head spinning, cold. He found a deli 2 blocks away and ordered a sandwich he couldn't taste, then sat at a small table by the window and watched the city move. Business people rushing to meetings, tourists studying maps, delivery drivers weaving through traffic, all of them living normal lives where the most dangerous thing they faced was deadlines or bad weather. His phone buzzed, a text from Danny. "Forgot my lunch. Can you bring it?" Evan's heart clenched. He'd been so focused on Russo and wires and justice that he'd forgotten to check that Danny had everything he needed. What kind of father did that? What kind of man put revenge ahead of his son's basic needs? He texted back, "On my way. Sorry, champ." Then he called Sarah. "I need to make a stop. Family emergency. We have training at 2. My son forgot his lunch. I'll be back by 3 at the latest." There was a pause, and Evan could almost hear Sarah weighing his reliability against her understanding that real life didn't pause for investigations. "Fine. 3 o'clock. Don't be late." Evan drove to his apartment, grabbed Danny's lunch from the fridge, a turkey sandwich, apple slices, the cookies they'd baked together last weekend, and headed to the school. He was halfway there when he noticed the black SUV again, 3 cars back, making the same turns. They were still watching him, still documenting his movements. A cold rage settled over Evan. These men had invaded his life, threatened his son, turned his daily routine into a surveillance operation. And now he was supposed to smile and play nice, pretend he wanted to join their organization while secretly recording their crimes. The hypocrisy felt suffocating. But he thought about Mrs. Chen, about her grandson in remission, about 3 more days to say goodbye. He thought about Morrison's grandson who wanted to be a marine biologist, about Rebecca the nurse and Marcus his employee, about all the people whose only crime was existing in Evan's orbit. And he understood that hypocrisy was a small price to pay for their safety. He pulled into the school parking lot, grabbed Danny's lunch, and walked toward the entrance. The SUV parked across the street, 2 men visible in the front seats, watching, recording, making sure Evan understood he was never alone, never safe, never beyond their reach. Inside the school, Danny waited by the main office, looking embarrassed. "Sorry, Dad. I was rushing this morning and just forgot." "It happens." Evan handed over the lunch bag, then pulled his son into a quick hug. "How's your day going?" "Pretty good. We're doing a simulation in history class about the Constitutional Convention. I'm playing James Madison." Danny grinned. "Mr. Thompson says I'm a natural at arguing." "Can't imagine where you got that from." Evan kept his voice light, but his eyes kept drifting to the windows, to the street where the SUV waited. "Listen, I need you to do something for me. If you see that black SUV outside, if those men approach you or your friends, I want you to go straight to the office and have them call me. Don't talk to them, don't engage, just get somewhere safe." Danny's smile faded. "Dad, you're scaring me." "I know, and I'm sorry, but I need you to trust me. These people, they're trying to intimidate me, and the best way to do that is through you. So please, just be aware. Be careful." "Okay." Danny looked small suddenly, young, stripped of the confidence that usually surrounded him like armor. Is this going to get better or worse? Evan wanted to lie, wanted to promise that everything would be fine, that the danger would pass and life would return to normal. But Danny deserved honesty. "I don't know yet. I'm working on making it better. But until I do, we have to be smart." "Are you going to get hurt?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Evan thought about the wire he'd be wearing, about the confrontations he'd be walking into, about the very real possibility that he'd pushed too far and would pay the ultimate price. "I'm going to be careful," he said, which wasn't an answer but was all he could offer. Danny nodded slowly, then hugged his father again, this time holding on longer. "I love you, Dad. Please don't do anything stupid." "I love you too, champ. And I'll do my best." Evan walked back to his truck, feeling the weight of those watching eyes from the SUV. He drove back to Manhattan, took 3 unnecessary turns to make sure they knew he'd spotted them, then parked near the DA's office and walked the last 2 blocks. He was 10 minutes early for his 3 o'clock training session, but Sarah was already in the conference room reviewing case files with 2 other prosecutors. "Mr. Hart?" she said formally, acknowledging his presence without warmth. We were just discussing your cover story. Have a seat. The afternoon was a blur of legal terminology and tactical planning. They reviewed the financial documents that made Hart's auto repair look desperate, rehearsed conversations about why Evan had changed his mind about Russo's offer, discussed contingencies if Russo demanded proof of loyalty. One of the prosecutors, a sharp-eyed woman named Chen who specialized in organized crime, asked pointed questions about Evan's psychology, his triggers, his ability to maintain composure under pressure. Mr. Russo will test you, Chen explained. He'll ask you to do things that make you uncomfortable. Small things at first. Deliver a package, collect money from someone behind on payments. If you refuse, he'll know you're not serious. If you comply, you become complicit. How do you plan to handle that? Evan had thought about this during the drive. I handle it by documenting everything and trusting you to protect me from prosecution. I'm not interested in becoming a criminal, but I understand that gathering evidence means getting close to crimes, maybe even participating in minor ways. As long as we're clear about boundaries, I can work within them. The boundaries are fluid, Sarah interjected. We can offer you immunity for certain activities, but that immunity has limits. If you participate in violence, if you help commit serious felonies, we can't protect you. The judge will reject any evidence we gathered, and you'll be prosecuted along with everyone else. So where's the line? The line is violence, Chen said firmly. You can accept money, make deliveries, even collect debts verbally. But the moment you or anyone else gets hurt, the moment weapons are involved, you abort the operation. Hit your panic button and we extract you. It sounded reasonable in theory. In practice, Evan knew that chaos didn't respect boundaries, that situations escalated faster than panic buttons could summon help. But he nodded anyway because what choice did he have? Mrs. Chen was already burned. The threats had already been made. The only path forward was through the fire, not around it. They broke at 6, Sarah dismissing the other prosecutors but asking Evan to stay. When the room was empty, she closed the door and turned to face him with an expression he couldn't quite read. My father kept a journal, she said without preamble. He wrote in it every night after his shift, mostly routine stuff, calls they responded to, equipment problems, birthday parties at the firehouse, but sometimes he'd write about the people he worked with, about you. Evan's throat tightened. Sarah, I don't think... He thought you were brilliant, intuitive, the kind of firefighter who could read a building like a book, who knew where the weak points were before the fire did. He also thought you were reckless, that you took chances no one else would take because you believed you were invincible. She paused. He was right about both things. Your father was the best man I ever knew. Don't, her voice cracked. Don't talk about him like he's some saint. He was a man, a good man, but just a man. And he died because he followed you into a building that should have been evacuated. He died because you convinced him there was someone inside who needed saving. There were signs, Evan said desperately, needing her to understand even though he knew she never would. Disturbed dust, movement in the windows, all the indicators that someone was trapped inside. The investigation found no evidence of anyone else in that building. No bodies, no signs of habitation, just you and my father and Tommy Breslin, and only one of you walked out. Sarah's eyes were bright with unshed tears. So either you were wrong or you were right, and someone escaped while you were busy watching my father burn. Evan had spent 3 years trying to answer that question, had replayed every second of that night in his mind until the memories became dreams, became nightmares. I don't know, Sit, he admitted. I've never known. And that's the worst part. Not knowing if I sent him in for nothing or if I failed someone who needed help. Well, now you get to prove which one you are. The hero who saves people or the fool who gets them killed? Sarah wiped her eyes angrily. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., you call Russo's number and tell him you want to meet. We'll have surveillance in place, audio equipment ready. And Mr. Hart, if you screw this up, if more people die because you think you're invincible, I will personally make sure you spend the rest of your life in a cell. Do you understand? Yes. Good. Now get out. Go home to your son. Because if this goes wrong, he's going to need good memories of his father. Evan left the DA's office feeling like he'd been hollowed out and filled with concrete. The evening air was cold. October sliding into November, the city preparing for winter. He drove home on autopilot, his mind replaying Sarah's words. her father's journal entries, the investigation that had cleared him legally but convicted him morally. Danny was already home when Evan arrived, sprawled on the couch with homework spread across the coffee table like a paper explosion. He looked up when his father entered, and his expression shifted from concentration to concern. "You look terrible," Danny observed. "Long day. How was the rest of school?" "Fine. We won the Constitutional Convention simulation. Turns out I'm good at compromise." Danny set down his pencil. "Did you eat lunch? After you brought mine?" Evan realized he hadn't. The sandwich from the deli was still in his truck, forgotten in the chaos of training and confrontation. "I'll grab something in a minute. Finish your homework." "It's mostly done, just calc problems." Danny hesitated, then said, "The SUV was there again. When you left. They sat there for like 20 minutes after you drove away, just watching the school." Rage and fear warred in Evan's chest. "Did they approach anyone?" "No, just watched. But Dad, it's creepy. Some of the other kids noticed too. Mrs. Patterson almost called the cops, but then they drove away." Evan sat heavily on the couch, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. "I'm sorry you're dealing with this. You shouldn't have to worry about things like this." "I'm 13, not stupid. I know something serious is happening." Danny closed his textbook. "Is it about Mom?" "No, your mother's fine. This is about work. About choices I made that had consequences." "Bad consequences?" "Complicated ones." Evan pulled his son close, grateful when Danny didn't resist. "But I'm handling it, and I promise, no matter what happens, you're safe. That's my only priority." They sat like that for a while, father and son, holding on to each other while the world outside grew dark and dangerous. Eventually, Danny pulled away and returned to his homework, and Evan forced himself to eat something, leftover pasta that tasted like cardboard, while scrolling through his phone. He found himself looking at photos from happier times. Danny as a baby, back when Evan's marriage was still intact and his career was still meaningful. Danny's first day of school, wearing a backpack almost as big as he was. Danny at the beach last summer, building sandcastles and laughing at nothing because that's what kids did when life was simple. When had it become so complicated? When had doing the right thing started feeling like walking through fire? His phone rang at 9:47 p.m., not unknown this time, Sarah's direct number. "We've got a problem," she said without greeting. "Russo knows you're working with us." Evan's blood went cold. "How?" "We're not sure, but one of our informants just contacted us. Says word on the street is that Evan Hart is talking to prosecutors, that he's wearing a wire. Russo's people are furious. They're looking for you." "How is that possible? We haven't even made contact yet." "Someone leaked, someone in our office, or someone who saw you coming here. It doesn't matter how. What matters is you're burned before we even started." Sarah's voice was tight with frustration. "You need to get somewhere safe. Take your son and disappear until we figure this out." "Disappear where? Russo's people followed me to Danny's school. They know where I work, where I live. There's nowhere in this city they can't find me." "Then leave the city. I can arrange protection, a safe house upstate. Running won't solve this. Russo will just target Morrison or Rebecca or Marcus. Everyone I talk to becomes collateral damage." Evan's mind was racing, calculating options, discarding impossible solutions. "There's only one way this ends." "Don't do anything stupid, Hart. That's an order." "It's not your order to give. You're a prosecutor, not my commanding officer." Evan stood, began pacing his kitchen. "If Russo knows I'm working with you, then the undercover operation is dead. But that doesn't mean I can't still get to him." "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about making him come to me. Making him so angry, so personally invested that he has to respond. And when he does, when he's sloppy and exposed, that's when you take him down." "That's suicide," Sarah said flatly. "You're talking about painting a target on your back and hoping we can protect you." "You can't protect me. You just said someone leaked. Your office isn't secure. Russo probably has people on your payroll, feeding him information, warning him about investigations." Evan felt a strange calm settling over him, the kind that came right before a dangerous call, when fear transformed into focus. "But if I go loud, if I make this personal and public, he can't hide behind lawyers and shell companies. He has to respond, and when he does, the whole city will be watching." "This is insane. This is the only play we have left. Evan thought about Mrs. Chen, about her jade pendant, about protection that couldn't be bought or negotiated. I'm going to challenge him, publicly, tomorrow, and either he takes the bait and you catch him, or he kills me and you have a murder case that's impossible to ignore. I can't authorize this. I'm not asking for authorization. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. You can either prepare to take advantage of it or not. Your choice. Evan hung up before Sarah could argue further. He stood in his kitchen, breathing hard, the decision made and irreversible now. He just committed to a course of action that would either end Russo's criminal empire or end Evan's life. There was no middle ground, no safe compromise. Danny appeared in the doorway, his face pale. I heard you talking. Dad, what are you planning? Evan wanted to lie, wanted to protect his son from the truth, but Danny deserved better than deception. I'm going to end this, one way or another. By getting yourself killed? By making sure people like Russo can't hurt innocent people anymore. Evan crossed to his son, put his hands on Danny's shoulders. I need you to do something for me. Tomorrow, you're going to stay home from school. I'm going to call your mother, ask her to come get you, take you to Connecticut for a few days. No, Danny's voice was firm despite the fear in his eyes. I'm not leaving you. Danny, no. You don't get to send me away while you do something stupidly heroic. That's not how this works. Tears were streaming down Danny's face now. I already lost Mom in the divorce. I'm not losing you because you think you have to save everyone. Evan pulled his son into a fierce hug, feeling Danny's thin frame shake with sobs. I have to do this. I have to make sure you grow up in a world where bullies don't win, where standing up matters, where doing the right thing means something. The right thing is staying alive for me, Danny said into his father's chest. The right thing is being my dad. I'm trying to be both. They stood like that for a long time, father and son, holding on while the world outside threatened to tear them apart. Eventually, Danny's sobs quieted, and Evan led him to his bedroom, tucked him in like he had when Danny was small, and nightmares could be chased away with nightlights and soft words. I love you, Evan whispered, more than anything. And no matter what happens tomorrow, I need you to know that everything I do is because I want you to be proud of who your father was. I'm already proud, Danny said. Just don't make me proud of a dead man. Evan kissed his son's forehead and left the room before he could break down completely. He returned to the kitchen and did something he hadn't done since the warehouse fire. He wrote a letter. Several letters, actually. One to Danny explaining his choices and apologizing for the pain they'd cause. One to his ex-wife asking her to help Danny understand. One to Morrison, thanking him for years of mentorship and friendship. And one to Sarah telling her where to find evidence he'd compiled about Russo's organization. Photos, documents, recordings from his phone of the threats. He sealed the letters in envelopes, addressed them carefully, and placed them in his truck's glove compartment. Then he sat at his kitchen table and planned his next move with the cold precision of someone who understood exactly what he was risking. Tomorrow, he would go public. He would contact every news outlet in the city, tell them about Mrs. Chen, about Russo's organization, about the arson and the threats. He would give interviews, name names, provide enough specific details that the story couldn't be ignored or buried. And he would dare Russo to respond, to come after him openly, in a way that left evidence and witnesses. It was reckless. Suicidal, even. But it was also the only move that made the game unwinnable for Russo. The criminal could have Evan killed, but that would create a martyr and intensify the investigation. He could try to discredit Evan, but the evidence was documented. He could do nothing, but that would embolden other victims to come forward, would show weakness to his organization. Every option was bad for Russo. And that was exactly what Evan wanted. He spent the night on the couch, unable to sleep, watching dawn creep across the city like smoke. When his phone alarm went off at 6 a.m., he was already awake, had been for hours. He made coffee, scrambled eggs that Danny wouldn't eat, and tried to act normal while his heart hammered against his ribs. At 7, he called his ex-wife. Jennifer answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep. Evan? What's wrong? I need you to come get Danny, today. Now, if possible. What happened? Is he okay? He's fine, but I've gotten involved in something dangerous, and I need him away from me until it's resolved. There was a long pause. Then Jennifer said, "This is about your hero complex, isn't it? You couldn't just stay in your lane, had to get involved in someone else's problem." "It's more complicated than that. It always is with you. You always think you're the only one who can fix things, who can save people, and you never think about the collateral damage." Her voice was bitter with old arguments, old wounds. "Fine. I'll be there by noon. But Evan, whatever you're planning, think about your son. Think about whether your principles are worth making him an orphan." "I think about that every second of every day." "Do you?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're about to do something monumentally stupid because you can't let go of the past." She hung up before he could respond. Evan sat with the phone in his hand, her words echoing in his head. Was she right? Was this about saving Mrs. Chen or about trying to redeem himself for Tommy's death? Was he being heroic or just suicidal with a better excuse? He didn't have an answer. Maybe there wasn't one. Maybe motivation didn't matter when lives were at stake, when the alternative was looking away while people burned. At 8 a.m., Evan started making calls, first to the New York Times, then to the Post, then to local news stations. His pitch was simple and compelling. A single father threatened by organized crime, an elderly woman burned out of her home, a pattern of arson and intimidation that the authorities were too corrupt or incompetent to stop. He had names, dates, photographs. He was willing to go on record, face to camera, and dare the criminals to respond. The news organizations loved it. By 10 a.m., he had 3 interviews scheduled, 2 for that afternoon and 1 for the evening news. By 11, social media was already buzzing with leaked details, hashtags forming around Mrs. Chen's story, amateur detectives trying to identify the men in photos Evan had posted. By noon, when Jennifer arrived to collect Danny, Evan Hart had become a very public problem for Vincent Russo. And problems, in Russo's world, had simple solutions. Jennifer looked older than Evan remembered, stress and single parenthood aging her faster than time. She hugged Danny tightly, then turned to Evan with eyes that mixed concern and anger in equal measure. "You're really doing this," she said. Not a question. "I am. And there's nothing I can say to stop you?" "No?" She nodded slowly. "Then do me one favor. Survive. Because if you get yourself killed, I'll never forgive you." Danny hugged his father with desperate strength. "Please don't die," he whispered. "I'll do my best, champ. I love you." "Love you too, Dad." They drove away in Jennifer's sedan, and Evan watched until the taillights disappeared, feeling like he'd just said goodbye for the last time. Then he returned to his apartment and prepared for war. The first interview aired at 3 p.m. on Channel 7. Evan sat across from an ambitious young reporter named Michaels, who'd built a career on exposing corruption. He told Mrs. Chen's story, showed the photographs of her burned building, explained the threats and the intimidation. He named Vincent Russo. He named his organization. He laid it all out for the city to see. "Are you afraid?" Michaels asked. "Terrified," Evan admitted. "But more afraid of what happens if good people stay silent. More afraid of teaching my son that safety matters more than justice." The interview was powerful, compelling, the kind of television that made viewers angry and inspired. Within an hour, it had been shared thousands of times. Within 2 hours, other victims were coming forward, telling their own stories of Russo's organization, adding to the chorus of voices demanding action. And in an office somewhere in Manhattan, Vincent Russo watched the interview with cold fury and began making calls. Evan was in his truck, driving toward his second interview, when the SUV appeared again. But this time, it didn't follow at a distance. It pulled alongside him at a stoplight, and the rear window rolled down. The thin man with glasses looked at him with something like regret. "Wrong choice, Mr. Hart," he said. "Last chance to walk away." "Already made my choice," Evan replied. "How about you?" The light turned green. Both vehicles accelerated, and the SUV suddenly swerved, slamming into Evan's truck with enough force to push him into oncoming traffic. Horns blared, brakes screeched. Evan fought the steering wheel, managed to straighten out, but the SUV was coming again, deliberately trying to force him into a collision. This was it, the response. Russo's answer to public defiance was attempted murder in broad daylight, and Evan realized with crystal clarity that he'd misjudged how desperate these men were, how willing they were to escalate. He grabbed his phone, hit the panic button that Sarah's team had installed. Then he did something crazy. He accelerated toward the next intersection, timing his approach to hit the yellow light at full speed. The SUV followed, committed to the chase. But Evan knew this intersection, knew that the cross traffic didn't wait for reds, that delivery trucks used it as a shortcut. The timing was everything. He shot through just as the light turned red and heard the screaming crunch of metal behind him as the SUV T-boned a garbage truck. In his rear-view mirror, Evan saw the SUV crumpled and smoking, saw people running toward it with phones out recording. Saw, finally, evidence that couldn't be ignored or explained away. Attempted murder captured on a dozen cell phones, uploaded before Russo's lawyers could make it disappear. Evan pulled over 2 blocks away, his hands shaking on the wheel. His phone was ringing, Sarah probably, responding to the panic signal. But he couldn't answer yet. He needed a moment to process that he was alive, that he'd survived, that the fire hadn't consumed him. Not yet, anyway. The war had just begun, and Evan Hart had fired the first shot that couldn't be taken back. Now he just had to survive the response. Evan's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Sarah's number flashed on the screen 3 times before he finally answered, his voice steadier than his hands. "I saw it," Sarah said without preamble. "The whole thing. We had surveillance on you after last night, and our unit captured the entire chase. Are you hurt?" "No. Shaken, but intact." Evan watched in his rear-view mirror as police cars and an ambulance converged on the crashed SUV. "The men in that vehicle are in custody. 2 injured, 1 critical. They're not going anywhere." Sarah's voice carried a mixture of satisfaction and concern. "This changes everything, Hart. You just handed us attempted murder on camera. Russo can't lawyer his way out of this." "He'll try. He'll say they were rogue operators, that he had no knowledge of their actions. Let him try. We've got witnesses, video evidence, and a pattern of behavior that's going to be very hard to explain away." Sarah paused. "Where are you now?" "Parked on Lexington, about 2 blocks from the crash, trying to remember how to breathe." "Stay there. I'm sending a unit to pick you up. You're not safe alone anymore, not after this. Russo's going to be desperate, and desperate men do stupid things. I'm counting on it." "That's what worries me." Sarah's tone shifted, became almost gentle. "You did good today, Hart. Reckless and insane, but good. My father would have called it a controlled burn, destroying the small stuff to save the big picture." Evan felt his throat tighten. "Your father was better at this than I am. My father's dead because he trusted you. But maybe, just maybe, you're finally worth that trust." She hung up before he could respond. 2 patrol cars arrived within minutes, lights flashing but sirens silent. A young officer with a serious face and careful eyes approached Evan's truck, hand resting on his weapon until he confirmed Evan's identity. "Mr. Hart? I'm Officer Rodriguez. DeBreslin asked us to escort you to a secure location. If you'll follow us, sir." Evan followed the patrol cars through Manhattan traffic, hyper-aware of every vehicle around him, every pedestrian who looked too long, every shadow that might hide a threat. They drove to a nondescript building in Midtown, underground parking that led to an elevator that required a key card, corridors that smelled like government efficiency and institutional coffee. Sarah waited in a conference room on the 7th floor, surrounded by monitors showing news coverage of the crash. Every major network was running the story: attempted murder in broad daylight, organized crime exposed, a single father's brave stand against corruption. Evan's face was everywhere, his interview from earlier playing on loop, his words about justice and safety becoming sound bites that would define the narrative. "You're a celebrity," Sarah said as he entered, "a very endangered celebrity." "I didn't do this for fame." "No, you did it because you have a death wish and a savior complex." She gestured to a chair. "Sit. We need to talk strategy." Evan sat, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline from the chase was wearing off, leaving behind the familiar ache of muscles held too tense for too long. "What's the status of the men from the SUV?" "The driver's in surgery. The front passenger has a broken arm and a concussion. And your friend with the glasses, the thin man, he's mostly fine. And he's talking." Evan leaned forward. "Talking how?" "Singing like a canary who just discovered opera." Sarah pulled up a file on one of the monitors. His name is Marcus Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen, ironically. He's been with Russo's organization for 8 years, handling collections and enforcement, and he's apparently been waiting for a reason to flip, because the moment we offered him a deal, he gave us everything. Why would he flip? Because he's smarter than his colleagues. He knows attempted murder of a public figure, on camera, with dozens of witnesses, is the kind of case that doesn't get buried or negotiated. He's looking at 20 years minimum unless he cooperates. Sarah pulled up a photo of Marcus Chen in an interrogation room, his glasses cracked, his expensive suit torn. He's giving us names, addresses, bank accounts, the entire organizational structure of Russo's operation. And Russo? In the wind. We went to his apartment, his office, his known associates. Nothing. He's gone to ground. Sarah's expression hardened. But he can't hide forever. Not now. Not with this much attention. Every cop in the city is looking for him. Every federal agency with jurisdiction wants a piece of this case. It's only a matter of time. Time for what? For him to regroup, to send someone else after me? Evan stood, began pacing. You're thinking like a prosecutor, Sarah. You're thinking about trials and evidence and justice. But Russo's thinking about survival, and cornered animals are the most dangerous. Which is why you're staying here tonight. We've got secure rooms upstairs, protection detail, everything you need. I need to check on my son. Your son is safe in Connecticut with his mother. I've already arranged for local police to do regular drive-bys of her address. Danny's fine, Hart. You're the one in danger. Evan wanted to argue, wanted to insist he could protect himself, but the crash had stripped away his illusions of invincibility. He'd gotten lucky today. The next attempt might not leave him alive to tell the story. Okay, I'll stay. But I need to call Danny. Let him know I'm all right. Make it quick, and don't tell him where you are. Evan stepped into the hallway and dialed his son's number. Danny answered on the first ring, his voice high with worry. Dad, I saw the news. They said someone tried to kill you. I'm fine, champ. Not even a scratch. Don't lie to me. I'm not a kid. Danny's voice cracked. Mom's freaking out. She keeps saying you're going to get yourself killed, that you're being selfish and stupid. Your mother's not wrong. But you're doing it anyway. I am. Evan leaned against the wall, feeling the weight of every choice that had led to this moment. Danny, I need you to understand something. What I'm doing, it's not about being a hero. It's not about proving anything. It's about making sure that people like Russo can't hurt innocent people anymore. It's about making sure you grow up in a world where standing up actually means something. I don't care about the world, Danny said fiercely. I care about you. I care about having a dad. And I care about being a dad you can be proud of. Not just someone who talks about doing the right thing, but someone who actually does it, even when it's hard. Evan closed his eyes. I know I'm asking a lot. I know this is scary. But I need you to trust that I'm being as careful as I can be. Careful would be running away. Careful would be letting the police handle it. The police can't handle it alone. Sometimes regular people have to stand up. That's what makes a society work. Not just laws and enforcement, but ordinary people refusing to look away. Danny was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, You sound like Grandma. She used to say stuff like that, about responsibility and community and not being a bystander. Your grandmother was the wisest person I ever knew. I wish she was here to tell me I'm being an idiot. She'd probably tell you you're being brave and stupid at the same time. That's what she always said about firefighters. Danny's voice softened. I love you, Dad. Please don't die doing the right thing. I love you too, champ. So much. And I promise, I'm going to do everything I can to come home to you. After they hung up, Evan stood in the hallway for a few minutes, gathering himself. Through a nearby window, he could see the city sprawling below. Millions of lights, millions of lives, all of them interconnected in ways most people never considered. Somewhere out there, Russo was hiding. Somewhere out there, Mrs. Chen was recovering. Somewhere out there, other victims were watching the news and wondering if maybe, finally, someone was fighting back. Sarah appeared at his elbow. You okay? Define okay. Fair point. She handed him a cup of coffee that smelled like it had been sitting on a burner for 3 hours. The evening news is about to start. They're leading with your story. Russo's going to see it. and he's going to have to make a choice, cut his losses and disappear permanently, or come after you one more time. Which do you think he'll choose? Honestly, I think his ego won't let him run. Men like Russo, they're not just criminals, they're empire builders. They've spent decades constructing a reputation, a brand, a myth of untouchability. You just shattered that myth on live television. He can't let that stand. So he'll come for me. He'll try. And when he does, we'll be ready. Sarah's expression was grim. This is the dangerous part, Hart. The part where everything can go wrong very quickly. I need you to stay alert, stay in contact, and for God's sake, don't go anywhere alone. They watched the news together in the conference room, Evan's face filling the screen as the anchor recounted the day's events with breathless drama. The crashed SUV, the police investigation, the mounting evidence against Russo's organization. The story had everything: violence, justice, a regular guy standing up to powerful criminals. It was the kind of narrative that captured public imagination, that made people feel like maybe the system still worked, that maybe one person really could make a difference. Evan felt sick watching it, not because the coverage was wrong, but because it was so simplified. The news made him look heroic, brave, principled. They didn't show the fear that kept him awake at night, the guilt over Tommy's death, the terror that his choices would get Danny hurt. They didn't show the complexity, the doubt, the desperate hope that maybe this time he'd actually save someone instead of getting them killed. They're making you into a symbol, Sarah observed. That's going to make it harder for Russo to touch you without massive repercussions, but it's also going to make him more determined to respond. So we wait. We wait. The night crawled by with the agonizing slowness of anticipation. Evan was given a small room on the 8th floor, more like a hotel than a prison cell, with a narrow bed and a window that looked out over the city. He couldn't sleep. Every sound in the hallway made him tense. Every car alarm on the street below made him jump. Around midnight, he gave up trying and returned to the conference room where Sarah was still working, surrounded by files and empty coffee cups. "Can't sleep?" she asked without looking up. "Too wired." "You?" "I don't sleep much these days, not since I took this job." She leaned back in her chair, rubbed her eyes. "You know what I think about? Late at night, when I'm reviewing cases and drinking terrible coffee, I think about my father's funeral, about standing at his grave while hundreds of firefighters in dress uniforms saluted, about my mother's face, how she looked 20 years older in a week, about my sister Emily, who was only 8 at the time, asking when Daddy was coming home." Evan felt like he'd been punched. "Sarah, I'm not telling you this to hurt you. I'm telling you because you need to understand what's at stake, what you're risking." She met his eyes. "My father died doing what he thought was right. And maybe it was. Maybe that fire, that rescue attempt, maybe it mattered in ways we'll never know. But it destroyed my family. We survived, but we were never whole again. So when you talk about doing the right thing, about standing up and fighting back, I need you to remember that your choices don't just affect you. They ripple out, touch everyone who loves you, change lives in ways you can't predict or control." "I know." "Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're making all the same mistakes my father made, the same ones that got him killed." Evan wanted to argue, wanted to defend himself, but the words wouldn't come. She was right. He was Tommy's death all over again. The same stubborn certainty, the same unwillingness to back down, the same belief that he could control outcomes through sheer force of will. "What do you want me to do?" he asked quietly. "Walk away? Let Russo win? Teach my son that principles don't matter when things get difficult? I want you to survive. I want you to be smart. I want you to remember that martyrdom looks noble in stories but leaves behind broken families and unanswered questions." Sarah gathered her files. "Get some rest, Hart. Tomorrow's going to be harder than today." But tomorrow came too quickly, arriving with news that changed everything. Evan was in the conference room at 6 a.m., drinking coffee and watching the morning news, when Sarah burst through the door with an expression that mixed triumph and dread. "We found him, Russo. He's at a private airfield in New Jersey, trying to charter a flight to Mexico." Evan was on his feet instantly. "When?" "Flight's scheduled for 8 a.m. We've got units moving into position now." Sarah pulled up a tactical map on one of the monitors. This is it, Hart. This is our chance to end this. I need to be there. Absolutely not. You're a civilian, and this is a law enforcement operation. You stay here where it's safe. Safe wasn't part of the deal. I started this, and I need to see it through. Evan grabbed his jacket. Besides, Russo knows me. He's seen my face, heard my voice. If this goes wrong, if he manages to get to that plane, maybe I can talk him down. Or maybe he'll shoot you on sight. He was going to do that anyway. Evan headed for the door. Are you coming, or do I find my own way to New Jersey? Sarah stared at him for a long moment, and Evan could see her father in her expression, the same weighing of risks, the same calculation of costs. Finally, she grabbed her own jacket. You stay behind me at all times. You don't engage unless I specifically authorize it, and if I tell you to run, you run. Understood? Understood. They took an unmarked car driven by a federal marshal named Torres, a stoic man with military bearing who drove with the kind of aggressive precision that suggested he'd been in situations far more dangerous than a traffic chase. They crossed into New Jersey as the sun was rising, painting the industrial landscape in shades of gold and shadow. The airfield was small and private, the kind of place wealthy people used to avoid commercial airports and TSA scrutiny. A single runway, a handful of hangars, a small terminal building that looked like it had been built in the 1950s and forgotten. Sarah's tactical team was already in position. Unmarked vehicles stationed at every access point, snipers on nearby rooftops. The kind of overwhelming force that should make resistance pointless. Should being the operative word. Torres parked behind one of the hangars, and Sarah immediately began coordinating with her team leader, a stern-faced woman named Captain Walsh, who looked like she'd been waiting her entire career for a chance to take down someone like Russo. Target is in the terminal building with 2 associates, Walsh reported. The pilot's doing pre-flight checks on the aircraft. A Cessna Citation, registered to a shell company. We've got visual confirmation it's Russo. No weapons visible, but we're assuming they're armed. What's the plan? Sarah asked. We've blocked all exits. Local PD is handling perimeter security. My team moves in, surrounds the building, orders them to surrender. If they comply, this ends peacefully. If they don't... Walsh's expression hardened. We're authorized to use force. Evan listened to the tactical discussion with growing unease. This was real. This was happening. In the next few minutes, Vincent Russo would either surrender or fight, and people might die, including, possibly, Evan himself if Sarah let him get close enough to the action. I want to talk to him, Evan said suddenly. Before your team moves in. Let me call him, try to convince him to surrender. That's not protocol, Walsh began. Protocol is also filling out paperwork after a shootout. Protocol is explaining to the media why a tactical operation went loud in a civilian area. Evan pulled out his phone. Give me 5 minutes. Let me try to end this without violence. Walsh looked at Sarah, who hesitated, then nodded slowly. 5 minutes. But the moment he sounds like he's escalating, we go in. Evan dialed the number Russo had called from days ago, his heart hammering. It rang 4 times before a familiar, smooth voice answered. Mr. Hart, I have to admit I'm impressed. You've caused me more trouble than anyone has in years. It's over, Russo. The airfield is surrounded. You're not getting on that plane. And yet here I am, doing exactly that. Funny how determination can overcome obstacles. Russo's voice carried amusement rather than fear. Tell me, Mr. Hart, how does it feel to be responsible for all this? Mrs. Chen's building, your little car chase yesterday, the media circus, all of it because you couldn't mind your own business. Mrs. Chen's building burned because you're a criminal who hurts innocent people. The car chase happened because you sent thugs to kill me. The media circus is because people are tired of men like you thinking you're above the law. Evan kept his voice steady. But it doesn't have to end in violence. You surrender now, you get your day in court. You get to tell your side of the story. My side of the story? Russo laughed, a sound like breaking glass. My side is that I built an empire from nothing. My side is that I provided services people needed when legitimate banks turned them away. My side is that I'm the reason half the businesses in Chinatown exist, because I gave people capital when no one else would. At what interest rate? 20%? 50%? With what collateral? Their homes, their stores, their lives? Business is business, Mr. Hart. I don't make people borrow from me. They come willingly and they know the terms. Did Mrs. Chen know the terms included burning down her building? Did she know that failing to pay meant attempted murder? Russo's voice hardened. Mrs. Chen knew exactly what she was signing. She's not some innocent victim. She's a businesswoman who made bad choices and couldn't accept the consequences. Just like you, Mr. Hart. Just like your partner Tommy, who followed you into that warehouse because he couldn't accept that some people aren't worth saving. Rage flooded through Evan, hot and blinding. You don't get to talk about Tommy. Why not? I did my research on you. The failed firefighter with PTSD and survivor's guilt, the divorced single father working a dead-end job, the man who thinks being a hero will somehow make up for getting his partner killed. Russo's voice was mocking now. You're not fighting me, Mr. Hart. You're fighting yourself, and that's a battle you can't win. Evan forced himself to breathe, to think through the anger. Russo was trying to provoke him, trying to make him emotional and irrational. Classic manipulation. Maybe you're right. Maybe I am fighting myself. But that doesn't change the fact that you're surrounded by federal agents with very specific orders. You can surrender or you can die. There's no third option. There's always a third option. Russo paused. Tell me, have you checked on your son lately? Evan's blood turned to ice. What? Danny, right? 13 years old, staying with his mother in Connecticut. Nice kid, smart. Would be a shame if something happened to him. Sarah was gesturing frantically, signaling Walsh to move in immediately, but Evan couldn't process anything except the threat to his son. If you touch him, I won't have to. See, I have people everywhere, Mr. Hart. People you've never seen, never suspected. People who are very good at their jobs. And if I don't make a phone call in the next 10 minutes, those people are going to visit your son. Nothing violent, nothing traceable. Just a message. A reminder that actions have consequences. You're lying. Am I? Are you willing to bet your son's life on that? Russo's voice was soft now, almost gentle. Here's my third option, Mr. Hart. You tell your prosecutor friend to stand down. Let me get on my plane, let me leave. And I promise, on whatever honor I have left, that your son stays safe. Your friends stay safe. Everyone gets to go home. Sarah was shaking her head violently, mouthing, no, no, no. Walsh was coordinating with her team, preparing to breach the terminal. Torres had his weapon drawn, ready for whatever came next. And Evan stood there, phone pressed to his ear, faced with an impossible choice. Let Russo escape and betray everything he'd fought for, or risk Danny's life on the assumption that Russo was bluffing. 10 seconds, Mr. Hart. Then I make my call. Evan thought about his son's face, about Danny's blue eyes and easy smile, about 13 years of memories and dreams and possibilities. He thought about Mrs. Chen in her hospital bed, about Morrison and Rebecca and Marcus, about all the people who would suffer if Russo escaped. He thought about Tommy dying in that ICU, about promises made and broken, about the difference between being a good father and being a good man. And he realized there was no choice. There never had been. Because if he let Russo threaten Danny and got away with it, then every other criminal would know that Evan Hart's principles had a price, that his courage extended only as far as his son's safety, that he could be controlled, manipulated, broken. No, Evan said quietly. What? I said no, you don't get to threaten my son. You don't get to use fear as a weapon anymore. You're surrounded. You're finished. And if you have people watching Danny, they're about to be arrested by the Connecticut State Police that Sarah is calling right now. Evan's voice strengthened. Your third option doesn't exist, Russo. There's just surrender or die. Make your choice. For 3 heartbeats, there was silence on the line. Then Russo said, Wrong answer, Mr. Hart. You just killed your son. The line went dead. Evan's world narrowed to a single point of terror. He turned to Sarah, saw her already on her phone with Connecticut authorities coordinating protection for Danny. Walsh was shouting orders, her team moving toward the terminal in tactical formation. Everything was happening too fast and too slow simultaneously, time distorting under the weight of fear. Danny, Evan started, is safe, Sarah cut in, listening to her phone. Connecticut PD is at your ex-wife's house right now. Nobody's there except them. No threats. No suspicious vehicles. Russo was bluffing. You don't know that. He said he has people. He was manipulating you, playing on your fear. It's what men like him do when they're cornered. Sarah grabbed his arm. Danny is safe, but we need to end this now, before Russo tries something else. Walsh's team reached the terminal entrance. Through binoculars, Evan could see movement inside, shadows passing in front of windows, the shape of men preparing for something. Then the terminal door opened and Russo walked out, hands raised, flanked by his 2 associates. For a moment, Evan thought it was over, thought Russo had accepted defeat, had chosen surrender over suicide. The tactical team was moving in, weapons trained, voices shouting commands to get on the ground, to show hands, to comply or die. But something was wrong. Russo was smiling, that same smooth, confident smile that said he knew something everyone else didn't. And then Evan saw it, the detonator in Russo's raised hand, thumb hovering over the button. "Stand down," Russo called out. "Stand down or I blow this entire airfield to hell. I've got explosives in the terminal, in the hangars, enough C4 to level this entire location. Everyone dies, or you let me get on that plane." Walsh froze, her team halting mid-approach. Sarah was on her radio, desperately calling for a bomb squad, for someone to confirm if the threat was real. Torres was pulling Evan back toward the car, following protocol that said civilians didn't belong anywhere near potential explosions. But Evan wasn't moving. He was staring at Russo, at the detonator in his hand, and he was seeing something that made his firefighter's instincts scream. The terminal behind Russo wasn't wired. There were no cables, no suspicious packages, no signs of the kind of setup required for the explosive payload he was claiming. Russo was bluffing again. Had to be, because wiring an entire airfield for demolition wasn't something you did overnight, wasn't something you could accomplish while federal agents were watching. It was a desperate play from a desperate man who'd run out of options. "He's lying," Evan said to Sarah. "There are no explosives." "You can't know that. I spent 15 years reading buildings, understanding structure and weakness, and how fire spreads. That terminal isn't rigged. He's running a bluff because it's all he has left." Sarah looked between Evan and Russo, calculating odds, weighing risks. Then she turned to Walsh. "Call it. Is he bluffing?" Walsh studied the terminal through her scope, her expression unreadable. "I don't see any obvious wiring, but if I'm wrong, if there's even a chance he's telling the truth, we could lose dozens of lives." "There's always a chance," Evan said. "That's what terrorists and criminals count on, that good people will choose safety over action. That fear will paralyze us." He thought about Tommy, about charging into burning buildings knowing he might not come out, about the calculations that saved lives and the ones that ended them. "But sometimes you have to trust your instincts, and my instincts say he's full of shit." Sarah held his gaze for a long moment. Then she keyed her radio. "All units, target is bluffing. Authorization to engage." Walsh didn't hesitate. Her team surged forward with professional efficiency, closing the distance before Russo could react. He pressed the detonator. Nothing happened. He pressed it again, panic replacing confidence. Still nothing. And then Walsh's team was on him, taking him down hard, zip-tying his hands while reading his rights in voices that brooked no argument. It was over in seconds. No explosion, no gunfire. Just professional law enforcement doing what they'd trained for, ending a criminal's run with overwhelming force and perfect execution. Evan's legs gave out. He sat hard on the ground, adrenaline crash hitting him like a physical blow. Sarah was beside him instantly, her hand on his shoulder. "You were right," she said quietly. "He was bluffing. This time. But what if I'd been wrong? What if there had been explosives and I'd gotten dozens of people killed with my confidence? Then we'd be planning funerals instead of trials. But you weren't wrong, Hart. You read the situation correctly." Sarah helped him stand. "That's the thing about making hard calls. Sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong, and you don't get to know which until after you've committed. But you make the call anyway because the alternative is paralysis." They watched as Walsh's team secured Russo and his associates, loading them into armored vehicles for transport back to Manhattan. The man who'd threatened Mrs. Chen, who'd burned buildings and terrorized neighborhoods, who'd built an empire on fear and violence. He looked small now, diminished, just another criminal in handcuffs wondering how his carefully constructed world had collapsed so quickly. "Is it really over?" Evan asked. "The arrest is over. Now comes the investigation, the trial, the sentencing, months of legal proceedings. Sarah smiled grimly. But yes, Hart. For you, for Danny, for Mrs. Chen, it's over. Russo's not threatening anyone anymore. Evan pulled out his phone with shaking hands and called his son. Danny answered on the first ring, his voice small and scared. Dad? The police are here. They said there was a threat. There was. But it's over now. You're safe. I'm safe. Everything's okay. Evan closed his eyes, feeling tears he'd been holding back for days finally break through. I'm coming to get you, champ. I'll be there in a few hours. And then we're going home. For real? It's really over? For real. I promise. They drove back to Manhattan in silence. Evan emotionally exhausted, Sarah working on her phone coordinating the next phase of the investigation. Torres maintained his professional stoicism, but even he seemed relieved that the operation had ended without casualties. As they crossed back into the city, Sarah said, You know what the ironic part is? Marcus Chen, the thin man from the SUV, he's been cooperating all night, giving us details about Russo's operation that we never would have found otherwise. Turns out his father owned a restaurant in Chinatown, and Russo bankrupted him with predatory lending. Marcus joined the organization to survive, but he's been looking for a way out for years. So my interference gave him an excuse to flip, gave him a chance at redemption. Sarah looked at Evan. You started a chain reaction, Hart. Mrs. Chen's story inspired other victims to come forward. The car chase gave us evidence we needed. Your testimony will help us prosecute dozens of cases. You did what you set out to do. You made people care, and you stopped a predator. At what cost? That's not for me to judge. But I'll say this. My father died believing he was saving someone. You proved that belief wasn't wasted. You showed that sometimes charging into the fire is the only way to put it out. Sarah paused. He'd be proud of you. Angry, worried, but proud. Evan didn't trust himself to respond. They drove the rest of the way in silence, and when they reached the federal building, Sarah walked him to his truck. What happens now? Evan asked. Now you go get your son. You take him home. You return to your normal life. Sarah handed him a business card. But if you need anything, therapy referrals, witness protection, help with legal fees, you call me. You earned that much. Thank you for everything. Thank me by surviving, by being there for Danny, by showing him that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, is worth it. Sarah turned to leave, then looked back. And Hart? Take some time to deal with Tommy. Go visit his daughters. Let them see that you're not the villain you've convinced yourself you are. Give everyone a chance to heal. She walked away before he could respond, disappearing into the building where she'd spend the next months building a case that would put Russo away for life. Evan stood alone in the parking garage, feeling the weight of the past days settling onto his shoulders like smoke. His phone buzzed with a text from Morrison. Saw the news, you crazy bastard. Well done. Then one from Rebecca, the nurse. Mrs. Chen is awake and asking about you. Says she wants to see her guardian angel. And finally one from Danny. Hurry home, Dad. I miss you. Evan climbed into his truck and drove north toward Connecticut, toward his son, toward the life he'd risked and somehow managed to keep. The late afternoon sun painted the highway in shades of gold, and for the first time in 3 years, Evan felt like he could breathe without smoke filling his lungs. He'd walked into the fire and come out the other side. Not unscathed, he'd never be that again, but alive. Whole enough to keep going, strong enough to face whatever came next. And as he drove, Mrs. Chen's jade pendant swung gently from his rearview mirror, catching the light like a promise that protection wasn't about preventing all harm, but about having the courage to face it anyway. The drive to Connecticut felt longer than it should have, every mile weighted with the accumulated exhaustion of the past week. Evan's hands were steady on the wheel now, but his mind kept replaying moments, the crash, Russo's voice on the phone threatening Danny, the detonator that had turned out to be nothing but a desperate man's final bluff. He'd been right to trust his instincts, but the margin between right and catastrophically wrong had been razor thin. Jennifer's house appeared as the sun was setting, a modest colonial in a neighborhood where people mowed their lawns on Saturdays and knew their neighbors' names. It was the kind of place Evan had thought they'd raise Danny together, back when marriage seemed permanent and the future felt predictable. Now it was just the place where his ex-wife had rebuilt a life that didn't include him. Danny was sitting on the front steps before Evan even parked, and the moment the truck stopped, his son was running toward him. Evan barely had time to open the door before Danny crashed into him, arms wrapping around his father with desperate strength. "You're okay," Danny said into Evan's chest, his voice muffled and thick with emotion. "You're actually okay." "I promised I would be." Evan held his son, feeling the tension of the past days finally beginning to release. "I'm sorry I scared you, champ. I'm sorry for all of it. Don't apologize for doing the right thing." Danny pulled back and Evan saw that his son had been crying, his eyes red and swollen. "Mom's been watching the news nonstop. She keeps saying you could have died, that you were being reckless. But I told her you were being brave. There's a difference." Jennifer appeared in the doorway, backlit by the warm glow of her living room. She looked tired and angry and relieved all at once. Her arms crossed over her chest in the defensive posture Evan remembered from their worst fights. "Evan," she said, his name carrying 1,000 conversations they'd never quite finished. "You look like hell." "Yeah, I've been told that a lot lately." He released Danny but kept one hand on his son's shoulder, needing the physical connection. "Thank you for keeping him safe, for dealing with all this." "I didn't have much choice, did I? You made decisions that affected all of us without asking what we wanted." Jennifer came down the steps, and Evan could see the fear beneath her anger. "Do you have any idea what it's been like, watching the news, seeing you on every channel, wondering if the next story would be about your funeral?" "I know, and I'm sorry, but Jennifer, if I'd walked away, if I'd let those men threaten Mrs. Chen and done nothing, then she would have been someone else's problem, and our son wouldn't have spent 3 days terrified his father was going to die." Jennifer's voice cracked. "I'm not saying what you did was wrong. I'm saying it was selfish. You have a child who needs you, Evan, a child who's already lost too much." "Mom," Danny interjected, "Dad stopped bad people. He saved Mrs. Chen. I know what he did, Danny. I've been watching it play out on CNN." Jennifer looked at Evan, and he saw the woman he'd fallen in love with 16 years ago, the one who'd believed in him before the job changed him, before trauma and distance had eroded what they'd built. "I'm angry because I'm scared. I'm scared that one day you're going to take one risk too many, and Danny's going to be the one paying the price." "That's why I'm here," Evan said quietly. "To take him home. To show him that I can fight and survive, that doing the right thing doesn't always end in tragedy. This time. But what about next time? What about the next person who needs saving, the next fire you can't resist running into?" Jennifer shook her head. "You can't save everyone, Evan, and trying to is going to destroy you." "Maybe, but I'd rather be destroyed trying than intact from never caring." Evan met her eyes. "I know I wasn't a good husband. I know the job consumed me, that I brought the darkness home, that I chose strangers over my family too many times. But I'm trying to be a good father. I'm trying to show Danny that principles matter, that standing up costs something, but the alternative costs more." Jennifer was quiet for a long moment, and Evan could see her weighing his words against years of resentment and disappointment. Finally, she said, "Just bring him back in one piece. And Evan, consider therapy, real therapy, not just the mandatory sessions for work. You're carrying too much, and it's going to crush you if you don't deal with it." "I will, I promise." Danny hugged his mother goodbye, grabbed his backpack from inside, and climbed into Evan's truck with the relieved energy of someone finally going home. As they pulled away, Evan caught Jennifer watching from the doorway, her expression unreadable, but her posture suggesting she was already regretting letting Danny leave. The drive back to Manhattan was different from the drive out, lighter somehow, despite the exhaustion. Danny talked about everything he'd missed at school, about the robotics competition coming up, about a girl in his English class who might like him, but he wasn't sure. Normal teenager things, the kind of problems that felt enormous at 13, but would be forgotten by 16. Evan listened and responded and tried to be present, tried to make up for 3 days of terror with an hour of normalcy. They stopped for dinner at a diner outside the city, not the glass tower, but similar enough to make Evan remember where this had all started. Danny ordered a burger and fries with the appetite of someone who'd been too stressed to eat properly. Evan ordered coffee and pie he wouldn't finish, his stomach still too knotted for real food. "Dad," Danny said between bites, "are you going to have nightmares about the car crash and the guy with the detonator?" Evan considered lying, protecting his son from the truth. But Danny deserved honesty. "Probably. I have nightmares about a lot of things. It's part of having a job where you see people at their worst, where you have to make decisions that affect whether people live or die. Like the warehouse fire, the one where your partner died." Evan's hands tightened around his coffee mug. They'd never really talked about Tommy, about what had happened that night. It had always felt too raw, too complicated to explain to a child. "How do you know about that?" "I Googled you once, a couple years ago, when I was trying to understand why you and Mom split up." Danny looked down at his plate. There were articles about the fire, about the investigation, about how firefighter Thomas Breslin died trying to save someone who wasn't there. "Tommy died because I made a mistake, because I was so sure I was right that I didn't listen to the building telling me I was wrong." Evan forced himself to meet his son's eyes. "That's why I left the fire department. That's why I have the nightmares. Not because I'm a coward, but because I have to live knowing that my friend died trusting my judgment." "But you saved Mrs. Chen. You stopped Russo. You did the right thing this time." "This time," Evan agreed. "But Danny, I need you to understand something. What I did this week, it wasn't about being a hero. It was about trying to make up for Tommy, trying to prove that I can still save people, that his death wasn't completely meaningless. That's not healthy. That's not something you should try to copy." "Why not?" "If it helps people, because it's not sustainable. Because eventually the luck runs out, or the reflex is slow, or you make one mistake too many." Evan reached across the table, took his son's hand. "I want you to grow up brave and principled, but I also want you to grow up smart and careful. I want you to know when to fight and when to walk away. I want you to understand that survival matters, that being there for the people you love is sometimes more important than being right." Danny squeezed his father's hand. "I get it, Dad. I do. But I'm still proud of you." "Even though I scared you?" "Especially because you scared me. It means you took it seriously. It means you knew what you were risking." Danny pulled his hand back, returned to his burger. "Besides, someone had to stand up to those guys. Might as well be my dad." They finished dinner and drove the last stretch into Manhattan, the city lights welcoming them home like a familiar embrace. Their apartment building looked exactly the same as when they'd left, which somehow surprised Evan. The world felt fundamentally changed by the events of the past week, but the laundry room in the basement still had the same broken dryer, the lobby still smelled like Mrs. Rodriguez's cooking from 3B, the elevator still made that concerning grinding noise between the 4th and 5th floors. Danny went to bed early, exhausted by days of stress and the comfort of finally being home. Evan stood in his son's doorway for a while, watching Danny sleep, grateful beyond measure that this particular fire hadn't consumed everything he loved. Then he sat at his kitchen table and made a list. Not of things to do, but of things to face. Tommy's daughters, Sarah and Emily Breslin, were at the top. He needed to see them, needed to acknowledge the cowardice of his 3-year absence. Below that, Mrs. Chen, who deserved to know that her faith in him hadn't been misplaced. Morrison, who'd risked his reputation to help. Rebecca, Marcus, everyone who'd been threatened because of their proximity to Evan's choices. He fell asleep on the couch around midnight, his phone buzzing with messages from reporters requesting interviews and strangers thanking him for standing up to Russo. He ignored them all. The story would fade eventually, replaced by newer tragedies and more immediate heroes. That was fine. Evan had never wanted fame, just the ability to look at himself in the mirror without seeing Tommy's face burning in the reflection. Morning came with autumn sunlight and the smell of coffee that Danny had learned to make sometime when Evan wasn't paying attention. His son appeared in his school uniform, backpack slung over one shoulder, looking nervous and determined. "I'm going back to school today," Danny announced. "I've already missed 3 days, and Mr. Johnson says if I miss the robotics meeting today, they'll have to replace me on the team." "Are you sure? You could take another day if you need it." "I need normal, Dad. I need to go back to being a regular kid whose biggest problem is calc homework, not whether his father is going to survive the week." Danny poured orange juice with the confidence of someone who'd made a decision and wouldn't be swayed. Besides, if I stay home, I'll just worry about you doing something else dangerous. Evan couldn't argue with that logic. He drove Danny to school, watching with a mixture of pride and anxiety as his son walked through the entrance surrounded by friends who probably saw him as the kid whose dad had been on the news. Danny would handle it. He was stronger than Evan at that age, more resilient, better at balancing principle with pragmatism. After dropping Danny off, Evan drove to Metropolitan General Hospital. He'd called ahead, and Sarah Goldstein had confirmed that Mrs. Chen was recovering well, that her doctors were optimistic about her long-term prognosis. The burns would scar, the smoke damage to her lungs would require ongoing treatment, but she would survive. That was something. Mrs. Chen's room was on the 4th floor, overlooking a courtyard where patients in wheelchairs sat in the weak autumn sun. She was awake when Evan knocked, her small frame almost lost in the hospital bed, but her eyes were alert and bright when they found him. "Mr. Hart," she said, her voice rough from smoke damage but carrying unmistakable warmth. "My guardian angel." "I'm no angel, Mrs. Chen. Just someone who couldn't look away." "Is same thing. Angel is just person who help when others don't." She gestured to a chair beside her bed. "Sit, sit. Tell me, the bad men, they caught?" "They're caught. Russo's in custody. His organization is being dismantled. You're safe now. Everyone's safe." Tears filled Mrs. Chen's eyes. "My store, though. My home. All gone." "I know. And I'm so sorry. If I hadn't gotten involved, if I'd—" "No." She reached out with a bandaged hand, found his wrist. "You're not sorry for saving me. Those men, they would have burned building anyway. You just give me time to prepare, time to know someone was fighting for me." She squeezed gently. "My grandson, he in remission. Doctors say he have good chance now. I get to see him grow up because you stood up when you didn't have to." "What will you do? About the store?" Mrs. Chen smiled, and despite the bandages and the hospital setting, it was an expression of pure hope. "Community is raising money. The church, the neighborhood association, even people I never meet. They see your story on news, they want to help. Enough money now to rebuild. Maybe bigger, maybe better." She released his wrist, settled back against her pillows. "You show people it okay to care, Mr. Hart. You remind us we not alone. That worth more than any building." They talked for another hour, about her grandson, about her daughter coming from California, about plans for rebuilding and recovery. When Evan finally left, Mrs. Chen made him promise to visit again, to bring Danny so she could thank him for sharing his father with strangers who needed help. "You good man," she said as he was leaving. "Your son lucky to have you." Evan wasn't sure he believed that, but he accepted the words anyway. His next stop was harder. Sarah Breslin had provided an address in Queens, a modest house with a well-maintained yard and a Honda Civic in the driveway. This was where Tommy's widow lived with their 2 daughters, where the family had tried to rebuild after losing their husband and father to a warehouse fire that shouldn't have killed anyone. Evan sat in his truck across the street for 20 minutes, building the courage to knock on that door. He'd rehearsed what to say, apologies and explanations and acknowledgments of the pain he'd caused, but the words felt inadequate against 3 years of absence. Finally, he crossed the street and rang the bell. Footsteps inside. Then the door opened to reveal a woman in her early 40s with tired eyes and Tommy's smile. "Can I help you?" she asked, not recognizing him. "Mrs. Breslin? I'm Evan Hart. I worked with your husband. I was there the night—" His voice broke. "The night he died." Recognition flooded her face, followed by something complicated that might have been anger or grief or relief. "You," she said quietly. "Sarah told me you might come by. I wasn't sure you'd have the courage." "I almost didn't. But you're here now." She studied him for a long moment. "I should hate you. I've tried to hate you. But Tommy talked about you all the time, his partner, his friend, the guy who could read a building like a book. He trusted you completely, and that trust killed him. I know, and I'm so sorry. I was arrogant and reckless and so sure I was right that I didn't listen when the building told me I was wrong. Tommy died because I failed him." "Yes, he did." Mrs. Breslin's voice was steady, matter-of-fact. But he also died doing what he loved, what he believed in. He died trying to save someone. That meant something to him, even if no one was actually there to save. She paused. Sarah told me what you did this week. Standing up to that criminal, risking your life for a stranger. Tommy would have done the same thing. That doesn't make it right. No, it doesn't, but it makes you human. Flawed and stubborn and brave in ways that get people hurt. She opened the door wider. Come in. The girls should meet you. They deserve to put a face to the name they've been angry at for 3 years. The living room was filled with photographs of Tommy, in his dress uniform, holding his daughters as babies, laughing at a barbecue, living a life that had been cut short at 39. Sarah was there, older than in the pictures, but unmistakably Tommy's daughter. And beside her sat Emily, now 11, with her father's red hair and her mother's cautious eyes. Girls, Mrs. Breslin said, this is Evan Hart, your father's partner. Sarah stood immediately, her prosecutor's instincts making her defensive. What are you doing here? Facing what I should have faced 3 years ago, apologizing for not being at the funeral, for disappearing, for being a coward when you needed someone to be strong. Evan looked at Emily, who was watching him with an expression too old for her age. Your father was the best man I ever knew. He was brave and kind and always knew the right thing to say. And he died because I made a mistake. I'm so sorry. Emily stood and walked over to him, this small girl who'd lost her father too young, and Evan braced himself for anger or tears. Instead, she said, My dad told me something once. He said that being a firefighter meant sometimes you had to make choices where every option was bad, and you just had to pick the one that felt least wrong. Was that what happened? At the warehouse? Evan knelt so he was at eye level with her. Yes, I thought someone was inside. All the signs pointed to it, and I had to choose between walking away when someone might need us or going in when it might be dangerous. I chose wrong. But you didn't know it was wrong until after, Emily said. That's not the same as being bad. That's just being human. Out of the mouths of children came wisdom that adults spent lifetimes trying to learn. Your father would be so proud of you, Evan said, his voice thick. Both of you. They talked for hours about Tommy, about the job, about the impossible choices that came with trying to save people in a world that fought back. Mrs. Breslin told stories about her husband that made everyone laugh and cry. Sarah talked about becoming a prosecutor to honor his memory, to fight for justice the way he'd fought fires. Emily showed Evan her science project, explained her dream of becoming a doctor so she could save people without risk of burning buildings. When Evan finally left, as the sun was setting and the sky turned the color of smoke and fire, Mrs. Breslin walked him to the door. This doesn't erase anything, she said. You still made a mistake. Tommy still died. But I can see now that you've been dying too, just slower. Maybe it's time we both stop drowning in what happened and start living with it instead. I don't know how. Neither do I, but I think we figure it out by showing up day after day, trying to do better. She squeezed his arm. Sarah was right about you. You're worth the trust Tommy gave you. You just need to believe it yourself. Evan drove home feeling lighter than he had in years, as if some weight he'd been carrying had finally been shared with others strong enough to help bear it. The city lights were coming on, millions of windows glowing against the darkness, each one a life being lived, a story unfolding, a small drama of joy or pain, or the mundane miracle of ordinary existence. His phone rang. Sarah Breslin, the prosecutor, not the daughter. Hart, we've got a problem. Evan's stomach dropped. What now? Russo made bail. How is that possible? He's a flight risk. He tried to kill me. He's got the best lawyers money can buy. And they argued that the attempted murder charge was overblown, that the car accident was caused by reckless driving rather than intent, that Russo himself was trying to flee the country to escape death threats. Sarah's frustration was palpable. The judge set bail at $10 million. Russo posted it in cash. He's out. So this isn't over. The legal case is proceeding. We've still got him on multiple charges, and Marcus Chen's testimony is devastating. But yes, Russo's free until trial, and he's not happy with you. Should I be worried? You should be careful. He's being monitored, but that doesn't mean he won't try something. Sarah paused. I'm sorry, Hart. I thought we had him contained. It's not your fault. The system is what it is. Evan pulled into his parking spot, stared up at his building. I'll be careful. And Sarah? Thank you for everything. Thank you for visiting my family. My mother called. She said you were different than she expected, more broken, more honest. She said Dad would have forgiven you by now. I'm not sure I can forgive myself. Then keep doing the work. Keep showing up. That's all any of us can do. Evan went upstairs to find Danny doing homework at the kitchen table, his robotics project spread out beside his textbooks. His son looked up when Evan entered, immediately reading concern in his father's expression. What's wrong? Russo made bail. He's out. Danny's face paled. Does that mean he'll come after us again? I don't know, but I'm not taking chances. Evan pulled out his phone. I'm calling Morrison, setting up protection. We'll have someone watching the building, someone near your school, and if anything feels wrong, we call the police and you. Danny set down his pencil. I know the drill, Dad. We've been through this already. I know. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing. Danny stood, moved to hug his father. You did what you had to do, and if the price is being careful for a while longer, that's okay. We'll handle it. They ordered Chinese food for dinner, the irony not lost on Evan, and spent the evening working side by side, Danny on his robotics code and Evan on paperwork for the garage that had been neglected during his week of chaos. It felt normal, domestic, the kind of quiet evening that most people took for granted, but that Evan had learned to treasure. The days that followed settled into a cautious routine. Evan returned to work at the garage, where Marcus greeted him with a hug and customers treated him like a celebrity. The news coverage had died down, replaced by newer scandals and fresher tragedies, but people remembered. They thanked him for standing up, for showing that regular people could fight back, for making them believe that courage still mattered in a world that often felt too cynical to care. Danny returned fully to school, throwing himself into the robotics competition with the focused intensity he'd inherited from his father. The team was building something impressive, a rover that could navigate obstacle courses autonomously, making real-time decisions based on sensor data. Evan attended practices when he could, watching his son work with the easy confidence of someone who understood that problems had solutions if you were willing to do the work. Mrs. Chen was released from the hospital 3 weeks after the fire. The community held a celebration, raising over $200,000 to rebuild her store and help with medical expenses. Evan attended, watching as this small woman who'd survived so much stood before a crowd and thanked them through tears. She spotted Evan in the back and insisted he come forward, hugged him tightly despite her healing burns, and told everyone that angels came in unexpected forms. Morrison retired officially that month, ending 43 years with the FDNY. His retirement party was held at the firehouse where he'd started his career, surrounded by generations of firefighters he'd trained and mentored. He found Evan in the crowd and pulled him aside. Heard you visited the Breslins, Morrison said. I did. Should have done it 3 years ago. Should have, but doing it now is better than never doing it at all. Morrison clapped him on the shoulder. You're healing, Hart. Slowly, messily, but healing. Keep it up. What about you? What happens now? Now I spend time with my grandson, teach him to fish, bore him with stories about the old days. Morrison smiled, and I sleep through the night for the first time in 40 years without waiting for the alarm bell. The trial date was set for March, 5 months away. Sarah Breslin called regularly with updates. New evidence discovered, witnesses coming forward, the case against Russo growing stronger despite his legal team's best efforts. Marcus Chen's cooperation had opened doors to criminal networks that extended far beyond New York, touching organized crime families across the East Coast. Taking down Russo would ripple outward, disrupting operations that had existed for decades. But Russo himself remained free, monitored but mobile, wealthy enough to maintain his lifestyle while awaiting trial. Evan saw him once, by accident, at a restaurant in Midtown. Their eyes met across the dining room, and Russo raised his wine glass in a mocking toast. The thin man's smile hadn't changed, still confident, still certain that money and connections would save him. Evan didn't respond. He simply turned away and continued his dinner with Danny, refusing to give Russo the satisfaction of fear or anger. But he felt the man's eyes on him for the rest of the meal, a reminder that some fires smoldered long after the flames were extinguished. December came with the first real cold, winter settling over the city like a blanket that smelled of snow and possibility. Danny's robotics team qualified for the regional competition, their rover performing flawlessly in the trials. Evan watched his son accept the qualifying certificate with pride that had nothing to do with robots and everything to do with seeing Danny grow into someone principled and brave and careful all at once. Christmas was quiet, just the two of them, but it felt full in ways that previous holidays hadn't. They cooked together, badly, but with enthusiasm, and watched movies and talked about everything and nothing. On Christmas morning, Danny gave his father a framed photograph. The two of them at the robotics competition, Danny holding his certificate, Evan's hand on his son's shoulder, both of them smiling like they'd survived something important and come out stronger. "So you remember," Danny said, "that even when things are hard, even when you're scared, you're not alone." Evan hung the photo in the living room where he'd see it every day, a reminder that some fights were worth fighting, some fires worth walking through, some risks worth taking because the alternative was forgetting why any of it mattered. On New Year's Eve, Evan received a call from Sarah Breslin. "Turn on the news," she said without preamble. He did, and watched as breaking news reported that Vincent Russo had been found dead in his apartment, apparent suicide, a single gunshot wound to the head. The reporters were speculating wildly, guilt over his crimes, fear of prison, the collapse of his empire. The police were investigating, but preliminary findings suggested he'd been alone when he died. "Suicide?" Evan asked. "That's the official determination." Sarah's voice was carefully neutral. "Though between you and me, Russo wasn't the type.